A young man with light blue hair, Roland, makes a firm decision, declaring his intention to stop the engagement annulment no matter the cost, vowing to ensure no one suffers unfairly or is humiliated. His younger sister, also with light blue hair, watches him with admiration, believing he is destined to leave behind another legend in this world. Roland stands resolute, his gaze sharp and determined. The world around him seems to shimmer with magical energy as a title appears, questioning if the prince's attendant is secretly saving someone, and asserting that the prince's attendant is actually an ally of the villainess. His intense gaze pierces through the page, a powerful presence that hints at an undeniable legend in the making. A persistent sound of grinding gears echoes within Roland's mind, a familiar noise that has followed him for as long as he can remember. It surfaces during unexpected moments, especially when he finds himself at a crossroads, unsure of his next move. Each time, the sound compels him to stop and think. He perceives this world as a grand puppet show, meticulously crafted by an unseen hand. He and others are merely puppets, moved by invisible strings, their lives watched from above as if they are just scenes in someone's grand design. He wonders if they are truly being controlled. The grinding gears intensify, their sound now emanating from a grand mansion. A voice, filled with frustration, cries out that it can no longer bear the burden. Inside the mansion, Edward, the first prince, stands with a hand over his heart, his voice ringing out with authority. He publicly annuls his engagement to Adrienne, declaring his unwavering devotion to his one and only love, Lady Crystal. Roland, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and realization, confirms Edward's declaration, acknowledging the prince's words. As Edward makes his pronouncement, Roland, amidst a group of other attendants, raises his hand, a look of confusion on his face. He then states his own name, Roland Valery Oriole. He was born with the distinct features of the Oriole lineage: azure hair and violet eyes, colors that served as undeniable proof of a hero throughout history. The legendary Holy Sword Belgrande was said to have been sent from the heavens, and the moment it became reality, he was declared a hero for the first time in 30 years, after hundreds of years. As a child, he could hold the legendary Holy Sword with ease, a weapon said to be wieldable only by heroes. Yet, even then, a flicker of doubt crossed his young face, a silent question forming in his mind. In this peaceful era, dragons were considered endangered, and even the Demon King lived quietly in obscurity. The Holy Sword, once a symbol of power, had become nothing more than a useless relic. Meanwhile, Roland, the eldest son of the Oriole family, one of the 5 ducal houses said to rival even the royal family in influence, held a position of immense power and prestige in their united nation. He was also Edward, the first prince's childhood friend and most trusted confidant in the royal court. The Holy Sword Belgrande, once his destiny, was now merely displayed in the temple to draw crowds and earn offerings. He was, in his own estimation, nothing more than a sycophant, just attendant A to the prince. His eyes widened in disbelief as he processed the words. Had he truly just heard engagement annulment? He couldn't believe it. Edward, however, seemed to anticipate his reaction, a knowing smile gracing his lips. He told Roland he knew he would say that, and that they had found proof. He then declared that Adrienne had attempted to frame Lady Crystal, presenting this as undeniable evidence. He implored everyone to lend their support for the sake of Crystal and himself, announcing that the day to settle Adrienne's wrongdoing would be at the graduation party, 6 months from that moment. The other students quickly echoed Edward's sentiments, affirming their loyalty to His Highness. They asserted that Adrienne must have already extended her influence to their fiancés as well, and that any foolish enough to be swayed by such a wicked woman should be cast aside without hesitation, following Prince Edward's lead. Roland watched, his expression a mix of shock and distress. Overwhelmed, he clutched his head, a single question echoing in his mind. How had it come to this? He sat at his desk, lost in thought, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He reflected on the situation, acknowledging that it was only a matter of time before the intricate plan unraveled. Despite its supposed foolproof nature, something felt amiss, prompting him to consider handling the underlying issues before they fully surfaced. He had already instructed the prince's closest confidants not to speak of the engagement annulment for now. As Roland grappled with these heavy thoughts, a sudden voice startled him, asking if he had finally come to his senses. He looked up to find Elena Qualiard, the all-purpose maid of the Oriole household, standing before him, having apparently entered through the ceiling. He questioned her presence, bewildered by her unexpected arrival. Elena, seemingly unfazed by his surprise, began to comment on his appearance, noting that his maid uniform looked freshly washed and his hair ribbon, the one she had given him 5 years prior, was clean. She even inquired if he had changed his perfume, causing him to stammer in confusion and apologize for his lack of awareness. He continued to question her peculiar behavior, wondering why she was acting this way. Elena, however, quickly dismissed his confusion, thanking him for taking such good care of the ribbon and declaring that she would immediately fetch Lady Rowena. Moments later, Rowena burst into the room, calling out to her brother with an urgent tone, asking if he had truly come to his senses. She then posed a direct question, wanting to know his thoughts on Prince Edward, the young heirs of influential noble families in his circle, and Baroness Crystal. Roland paused, considering her question, before offering a scathing assessment. He declared Prince Edward an absolute fool, describing the nobles in his faction as lemmings eagerly boarding a sinking ship. As for Lady Crystal, he saw her merely as a victim forced to bear the ideals of a love-struck prince and those self-absorbed nobles, concluding that this summed up the situation perfectly. Rowena, hearing his blunt honesty, expressed a mix of relief and frustration. She was glad he had finally come back to his senses, but lamented that he had realized it far too late. Elena, observing the exchange, added her own thoughts, praising Lady Adrienne's grace and remarking on how strange it was that everyone, even Edward, had spoken nothing but endless praise for Lady Crystal and constant complaints about Lady Adrienne for the past 6 months. She concluded that Roland had been far too easily influenced by fools, a sentiment Rowena echoed, stating that everyone could see it. Roland, reflecting on their words, wondered why he had allowed himself to be so lost. Rowena then gently asked him to explain what had happened to him. He began to recount the events of a year prior. Lady Crystal had transferred to their academy, falling for Prince Edward at first sight. This was unthinkable, as Edward's fiancée, Lady Adrienne, had already been chosen by the king himself. Despite this, Edward relentlessly pursued Crystal, a situation that would be a disaster if Duke Jeremy were to hear about it. As Roland finished his explanation, he let out a sigh, realizing that he was once again caught in a familiar, frustrating cycle. He began to recount, reflecting on Prince Edward's impulsive and emotional nature, a trait he had observed closely since childhood. He recalled a time when he himself, holding a bouquet of roses, had praised Lady Crystal, declaring her truly wonderful and asserting that Adrienne was nothing in comparison. He was, in his own estimation, bold and decisive, and if one were to put a positive spin on his stubbornness, it could be seen as reliability when leading a nation. However, Roland concluded that the prince possessed far too many flaws, and to compensate for these shortcomings, talented individuals, including Roland himself, were gathered around him. Yet, despite these efforts, before Roland truly understood the implications, he had become exactly what he was trying to prevent. Lady Adrienne recounts how Prince Edward, with the support of her brother and everyone in the salon, devised an outrageous plan to break off his engagement to Lady Crystal by making Lady Adrienne the villain. She adds that other young noblemen, infatuated with Lady Crystal, followed the prince's lead, accusing their own fiancés and demanding their engagements be broken off. The maid finds the situation hellish, while the young master is left speechless. The young master, observing the situation, notes that the salon members, who should be stopping this, are actually supporting Prince Edward. He internally believes the plan is full of holes and impossible, yet acknowledges that if the prince commands it, it will proceed. A young noble, his face contorted in anger, declares that they could easily find evidence or witnesses, whether real or fake, to prove Lady Adrienne tried to frame Lady Crystal. He finds the ease with which they could do this terrifying. The young master expresses concern that if Prince Edward breaks off his engagement without a mission, it would disgrace the aristocratic system, ruin the king's reputation, and lead people abroad to believe the nobility is collapsing, potentially inviting invasion. The maid then asks for his thoughts, noting that Lady Adrienne is the only one in her family with light blue hair and violet eyes, like the young master, and that she was blessed by Oriole. The young master explains that the hero of Oriole was once considered a fairy tale, but his brother proved the legend real, bringing glory and support to the once fading Oriole Duke family. The maid, however, warns that if the hero were to join forces with foolish nobles, he would be seen as someone who betrayed the people's trust, becoming hated and causing the country's downfall. Lady Adrienne, looking distressed, wonders if she will be lumped in with the others and treated like a witch. The maid, with a hand to her face, agrees, realizing she would also be dragged down and punished, lamenting her bad luck. The young master asks if they understand now. The young master, with a thoughtful expression, states that now that they understand the situation, it is time to figure out what to do next. The maid asks about the connection between Lady Crystal and the young master, who are now believed to be the cause of the current situation. He replies that he thinks it started shortly after she transferred there, and the first time he spoke to her was when she approached him in the school building. He continues, explaining that after that initial encounter, they happened to run into each other several times, but he never felt there was anything special about her. Lady Adrienne asks if he felt something faded at that moment, but he denies it, stating she was just a perfectly ordinary girl. He reflected on his past encounters with Crystal, recalling moments like reaching for the same book in the library or helping her when she stumbled. Before he knew it, he found himself constantly thinking about her, feeling as though Prince Edward's intense infatuation had somehow spread to him. The maid, however, found these numerous coincidences far too convenient, questioning if everything could truly align so perfectly. Adrienne, on the other hand, defended Crystal, describing her as a delicate and charming young lady, and suggesting it would be natural for someone to develop feelings for her after meeting her a few times. He continued to ponder, noting that every time their paths crossed, it was always when he was acting on impulse or doing something entirely random. He concluded that the only logical explanation was mere coincidence, as it wasn't as if she possessed foreknowledge of his plans. For now, he would simply categorize it as such. He then considered the broader political landscape, realizing that someone as possessive and single-minded as Prince Edward would never allow the current situation to persist. The prince was fully aware that all his loyal retainers had fallen for Crystal and had accepted this reality, a state of affairs that had endured for at least 6 months. This pervasive influence felt as though they had all been enchanted, treating Crystal and Prince Edward as the central figures of a grand narrative, and doing everything in their power to eliminate any who might obstruct their path. Adrienne then interjected, asking if her brother was immune to magic and curses, reminding him that he had been blessed by Oberon and Titania, the fairy king and queen, since childhood. Meanwhile, the maid speculated that Lady Crystal might be employing some form of magic. The maid questioned how Crystal could have circumvented the Academy's formidable anti-magic and defense barriers, as well as the vigilant court mages, to cast such a spell. He acknowledged the validity of her point but insisted that the current predicament was undeniably peculiar, prompting them to consider the gravest possible outcome. The maid, her expression resolute, wondered if it was fate, or magic, or perhaps a cruel jest by an unseen deity, as events seemed to be slowly but surely propelling them toward ruin. She declared that no mercy should be shown to an enemy. Once hostility was evident, they were to be considered adversaries, and they must act swiftly, decisively, and with bold courage to destroy them before they themselves face destruction. Adrian, her hands clasped in fervent agreement, affirmed that her brother would indeed be there to aid all those facing misfortune. She added that such action would benefit both their country and their family, allowing them to finally deal with those foolish individuals once and for all. As Adrian exclaimed how fantastic it all sounded, the maid, with a fierce glint in her eyes, declared that they should swiftly take care of their enemies. The young master, observing the women in his family, internally noted their ruthless efficiency when they perceived someone as an enemy, eliminating them without a second thought. He continued to ponder the unfolding events, a deep sense of injustice stirring within him. He considered the happiness Prince Edward envisioned with Lady Crystal, recognizing that such a future was built entirely upon the suffering of others. Specifically, the plight of the innocent Lady Adrian weighed heavily on his conscience, a situation he found utterly unacceptable. With a firm resolve, he declared to Adrian and the maid that his decision was made. A young man in a top hat and an elegant young woman stand before a grand building. The young man holds a cane, his expression serious, while the woman looks on with a slight frown. A sudden, urgent thought echoes. Wait a minute. The young man, now identified as the protagonist, internally assesses the situation, dismissing the threat of a bomb as a likely bluff, but acknowledging the real danger of the weapons. He decides against provoking the armed men. Meanwhile, one of the armed men, holding a dagger to a woman's throat, shouts aggressively, threatening to kill the women and claiming to possess a bomb. The protagonist, maintaining a calm demeanor, attempts to de-escalate, stating he doesn't know their goal but wishes to stop the violence. Adrian, standing beside him, quietly notes that with Gino also present, they might be able to handle the situation despite the number of people. He continues his attempt at diplomacy, suggesting that communication could bridge their thoughts and feelings. However, the armed man, now identified as Igor, furiously cuts him off, threatening to kill him if he doesn't silence himself. Another voice, sharp and commanding, interjects, shouting, "Enough, Igor." The commanding voice belongs to Kirill, who is seen with a thoughtful expression. He considers that if their captives are nobles, they could serve as valuable hostages or tools for negotiation. One of his subordinates, a bearded man in a horned helmet, questions why Kirill is stopping them, suggesting that killing these rich nobles would set a perfect example. The protagonist, slightly disheveled, adjusts his bangs with a sigh, internally lamenting that Adrian is still upset. Adrian, for her part, expresses her annoyance, remarking that if he intended to stop Igor anyway, he should have done so much earlier. Elsewhere, Lady Ruin, a young woman with short, light pinkish blonde hair, greets a maid, Elena, who thanks her for the exhibition tickets she received recently. Lady Ruin expresses her gladness that Elena could attend. Lady Ruin then introduces Elena to another person, stating, "Oh, and this is our maid, Elena." Elena, with a polite smile, introduces herself fully as Elena Qualiar. Back with the protagonist and Adrian, he reflects on the poor memory of Prince Edward's fiancée, noting her inability to recall people's names. Adrian, however, offers a sharp greeting to Prince Edward's attendant, implying she remembers him perfectly well. He then points out that Adrian has completely avoided the salon for about 6 months, questioning if she had forgotten about it. She retorts, stating there's no need to worry, as she remembers everyone except those who don't interest her. He then mentions rumors that a charming individual has been warming her seat as if it were their own. She counters, suggesting he has been talking with the wind and gossiping, implying he has no one truly worth conversing with. Adrian considers the current situation, realizing that reconciliation or teaming up with the protagonist now feels almost impossible. The protagonist, looking downcast, internally regrets his past actions, acknowledging that even if he was out of his mind back then, she had every reason to be harsh with him. He deeply regrets it. He found himself confronted by Igor, who, holding a dagger, questioned his noble status. Igor expressed a deep disdain for nobles, viewing them as carefree individuals. Igor continued his tirade, assuming the young master had never faced financial struggles or difficulties with women. Lady Ruin, however, interjected, stating that his noble status was perfectly clear at a glance, requiring no further explanation. She then revealed her own humble origins, explaining that she hailed from a remote village and had never even worn wooden clogs until she arrived in the city, implying a shared understanding of hardship. The young master looked on, surprised by her candid admission. Lady Ruin vehemently declared that she could not possibly understand Igor's bitterness. She then sharply criticized his personality as the true reason women might dislike him, urging him to reflect on his own foolishness rather than resorting to crime. Kirill, standing nearby, appeared to feel some sympathy for Igor's upbringing, but still found his criminal actions unjustifiable. Elena, the young master's maid, loudly affirmed Lady Ruin's statement. She then directly challenged Igor, asking if the women standing nearby were his. much to the young master's visible shock. Overwhelmed by the escalating situation, he closed his eyes and, with a sigh, asked them to simply keep quiet if they were truly worried about him. Elena proudly proclaimed herself the young master's loyal maid, privy to all his secrets, describing herself as his loyal hound. Lady Ruin, meanwhile, playfully characterized herself as the young master's little sister by name, but in truth, a maiden harboring a much more complicated crush. Lady Ruin, now embarrassed by the public spectacle, complained that everyone was staring. Igor, still confused by Elena's earlier question, asked if the red-haired woman was not one of the young masters. Elena quickly corrected him, clarifying that she was a loyal servant to the Oriole family. Elena further elaborated on the intricate dynamics among nobles, explaining that they engage in formal pleasantries while occasionally stabbing each other with words, ultimately deeming it a disgraceful relationship. The young master, utterly exasperated by the women's public antics and the thugs' continued confusion, finally erupted, shouting for them to stop provoking him and declaring he had heard enough. Elena, unfazed, calmly reminded him that he was the one who had asked for the explanation. Overwhelmed by the escalating chaos, he desperately tried to de-escalate the situation, pleading for a moment to talk things through. However, his attempts were met with immediate hostility as Igor snarled, demanding he simply shut up and die. Meanwhile, the bearded thug, confused by the lack of intervention, questioned why the boss hadn't stopped them earlier and urged him to do so again. Lady Ruin, undeterred, urged her Oni-sama to swiftly deal with the situation, while Elena, with a dismissive air, declared that such a minor disturbance didn't even warrant the boss or her own intervention. Kirill added to the pressure, stating that all the thugs were now unified in their intent to bring them down. The young master could only stare in disbelief at Elena's audacious remarks. Having reached his absolute limit, he let out a frustrated scream, realizing there was no longer any point in trying to reason with anyone. He charged forward, his expression a mix of exasperation and resolve, as Elena, taken aback by his sudden outburst, called out for him to wait. The air crackled with anticipation, hinting that the wielder of the holy sword was about to reveal his true power. The young master, his brow furrowed with concern, found himself facing a daunting challenge. He internally questioned the sanity of confronting an armed group with nothing but a cane, deeming such an act utterly insane. Elsewhere, the stern-faced butlers stood beside Crystal, both observing the unfolding events with a calm demeanor. Back with the young master, Crystal sternly informed him that they were fortunate to have apprehended the culprits without injury. However, she emphasized that even a slight misstep could have led to a disaster, her voice rising in alarm. Adrian and Maid One were also present, observing the exchange. She, still reeling from her words, worried that she showed no signs of calming down. The butler, stepping forward, gently admonished the young master for displaying a displeased expression to a lady. Despite the interruption, Crystal continued her impassioned lecture, urging him to stop looking around and pay attention. She continued, asserting that his priority should have been his own safety, reminding him of the immense responsibility he carried for his subjects and citizens. He conceded that her words might hold truth, but found the constant lecturing difficult to endure. Adrian, looking small, listened intently. Meanwhile, young Noble One pondered if Prince Edward had grown jaded from similar relentless lectures, noting that the prince had been raised in a rather spoiled manner. The young master and Crystal remained in the background, their discussion ongoing. Adrian then addressed Crystal, confessing that she had been quite captivated by her brother-in-law's gallantry when he had so swiftly incapacitated the ruffians. The admiration for the young master was palpable among the rescued ladies, who gazed at him with misty eyes from the moment of their rescue. Adrian, along with her companions, observed this widespread adoration. As the group continued to observe, Lady Ruin remarked on the harsh reality of their world, where a hero could be scolded by the very princess he saved. Adrian readily agreed with her sentiment, while the maid _1 nodded in silent affirmation. Meanwhile, Crystal continued her stern questioning of the young master, demanding to know what he and his companions were discussing so discreetly. He attempted to explain the apprehension of the culprits as a series of fortunate coincidences, a reflexive deflection of a blade, a trip, and a domino effect leading to their capture. However, she remained unconvinced, asserting that such a favorable outcome was merely a product of chance and luck, questioning if the process could be ignored simply because the result was good. Lady Ruin, overhearing the exchange, interjected to correct Crystal, stating that the events were not mere chance. She insisted that from the moment the young master deflected the blade, everything had unfolded precisely according to her brother-in-law's meticulous calculations. Crystal's expression shifted to one of skeptical surprise as she processed Lady Ruin's bold claim. She then turned her gaze back to the young master, directly challenging him. She questioned how he, a mere youth with no official position as a fencing instructor or guard captain, could have possibly planned such an intricate series of events. He responded with a somewhat sheepish, well, sort of. He then began to explain his unique circumstances, revealing that he was born with innate abilities befitting a true chosen hero, capable of rivaling dragons and demon lords. Though he was fortunate to live in a peaceful era with little need for such powers, he admitted to having utilized them on a few prior occasions. He continued his explanation, acknowledging that his claim of dealing with the armed group through careful calculation might be difficult to believe. He clarified that much of his past use of these abilities had not been made public to avoid confusion, implying that his true capabilities were largely unknown. Lady Ruin, eager to support her brother-in-law's claims, turned to Crystal and offered further evidence, stating that he possessed many wonderful anecdotes that, if heard, might convince her of his extraordinary abilities. Crystal, intrigued, inquired about these anecdotes, to which Lady Ruin enthusiastically confirmed their existence. She then recounted a specific, astonishing tale. When her brother-in-law was merely 9 years old, he single-handedly defeated 5 assassins who were targeting His Highness. Crystal's eyes widened in disbelief, her voice catching as she struggled to comprehend the revelation. Crystal, still reeling from the previous story, found the tale of the young master's childhood heroism utterly ridiculous, asserting that such an event would have caused a far greater commotion if it were true. Lady Ruin, however, firmly countered, explaining that a strict gag order had been issued to prevent public knowledge, as it would have been a profound disgrace to the royal family for a child to act single-handedly. Despite the secrecy, she insisted, it remained a fact known to those in the inner circle. He, the young master, recalled the excited Prince Edward from that time, who had been about to tell everyone, praising the young master, then known as Roland, for his amazing self-awareness. Still, she found it hard to fully accept the story, and he conceded that it was indeed a difficult truth to believe. Lady Ruin then offered another anecdote, asking Crystal if she was familiar with the Dorrance Rebellion incident that had occurred 5 years prior in the Demon Lord's territory. Crystal confirmed her awareness of the incident, recalling that it had been publicly reported as suppressed by foreign troops before the coup could fully materialize. Lady Ruin, however, clarified that this was merely the surface-level account. In reality, Lady Ruin revealed, at the secret request of both the current Demon Lord and the Great Temple of the Holy Church, the young master had single-handedly suppressed the rebel army in secret. This, too, was a state secret, known only to a select few. The young master, hearing these revelations, mused that even if he were to speak of them himself, people would likely not believe him easily. Lady Ruin, however, warned him that they should stop discussing such sensitive state secrets so casually, lest they be charged with a crime. Crystal, still processing, let out a small, disbelieving laugh. Adrian, now excited, interjected with another story, asking if they remembered the incident 2 years ago when the great beast Behemoth, exhibited in the royal capital, went on a rampage and attacked spectators. She proudly declared that her brother-in-law had gallantly saved Princess Edward's sister, who happened to be present. Lady Ruin, recognizing the event, mentioned that it had even been in the newspapers, suggesting Lady Adrian must have heard about it. Crystal, however, seemed to misunderstand, asking if they were referring to the scandalous rumor about Princess Rosaline and Lord Roland's passionate love affair. She then questioned if the love affair rumor had eventually been announced as a fabricated story in a gossip magazine. Adrian confirmed that the image of the love affair rumor still remained in the public eye. The young master internally recalled how he had quickly summoned Belgund and sliced the rampaging behemoth in half to protect the spectators, but the location of the incident had unfortunately attracted a great deal of attention. The story of the legendary Holy Sword defeats the rampaging behemoth was intended to be spread as brave Roland's heroic tale, but the love affair report written in a gossip magazine ended up gaining more attention. Adrian explained that Princess Rosaline had fallen head over heels for the young master's heroic actions. Elena quickly covered Adrian's mouth, preventing her from revealing that Princess Rosaline had unilaterally broken off her engagement with the prince of a neighboring country. Confused, Crystal inquired about the engagement, but Elena dismissed it as nothing. He then revealed that after the princess arbitrarily declared the engagement broken, she even started stalking him and was currently isolated under the pretext of recuperating from illness. He internally noted that the word stalking was absolutely forbidden. As a result, the original story of the hero defeating the behemoth disappeared, and a protest statement was quickly issued, declaring the love affair report a fabrication by the gossip magazine to settle the matter and protect the royal family's image. He pondered what was truly going on in the minds of Prince Edward and his sister, reflecting on how the princess had gone off the rails even before Prince Edward. Then, Elena asked Crystal if she had perhaps heard of the renowned absolute champion Roland, who had won the Royal Capital Swordsmanship Tournament 4 years in a row. She confirmed that she had indeed heard of absolute champion Roland. The young master, in his chibi form, internally wished that embarrassing title wasn't mentioned, but understood it was necessary for her to believe. She recalled that in the previous tournament, Prince Edward's confidence had dominated the podium, and His Highness must have felt quite proud as he placed the medals around the necks of the top 3. She mused that such an outcome was natural for a festival that had continued for 200 years. Crystal, with a thoughtful expression, wondered if the young master suspected the tournament was rigged. She had heard it was a lively event, and both His Highness and everyone else had appeared quite presentable. However, she continued, regardless of the other participants, Prince Edward himself possessed absolutely no charm without his royal title. She emphasized that the people in the salon must carefully choose who they follow, or they risk lowering their own standing. Moments later, Adrian's escort arrived, prompting her to excuse herself from the group. Crystal, observing the departure, bid farewell to Lady Renee, suggesting they chat leisurely another time. As Adrian departed, the young master reflected that his distrust towards the prince's associates seemed far greater than he had imagined. He recalled that he and Adrian had not interacted much, at least not since they were children. He remembered their relationship as children had not been bad. In fact, it should have been quite good. He pondered if there was a way to return to that kind of relationship, a longing evident in his thoughts. He then considered his current predicament, realizing he couldn't simply bow his head on his own accord in front of the prince. Yet, He acknowledged that he and his companions were at fault for making Adrian dislike them so much. He wondered what he should do. Meanwhile, Crystal lamented that they had only managed to draw out more complaints about Prince Edward, failing to convey any of her brother-in-law's greatness. She felt this journey was going to be a difficult one. She stood, her expression serious, as another woman's high-heeled shoes walked past in the background. She then wondered, with a slight frown, what they should do next. The narrative opens with a striking image of a young woman, her expression resolute, flanked by two young men. The title questions whether one is a spineless right-hand man or the worst possible fiancé, hinting at a complex romantic and political entanglement. Later, within a lavish room, Adrian, now serving as a maid, presents a grand bouquet of get-well flowers, a gift from Lord Roland and Lady Renee. Meanwhile, Crystal, seated elegantly with a teacup, observes that no such token of well-wishing has arrived from Prince Edward. She takes a slow sip from her teacup, her expression thoughtful as she considers the implications of Prince Edward's silence. Crystal then dismisses the lack of a gift, stating that it cannot be helped, as they were supposedly not there at the place where the incident occurred. Adrian stands silently in the background, listening. Her eyes, however, betray a deeper contemplation, a flicker of something unspoken beneath her composed demeanor. Closing her eyes, she seems to drift into a memory, a past event resurfacing in her mind. The scene shifts abruptly to a memory from 7 years prior, depicting a grand mansion. A young Prince Edward, then 7 years old, confronts a young Adrian, also 7, with a harsh declaration, questioning her status as his fiancée and calling her an ugly, slant-eyed girl with flashy hair color. Adrian, taken aback, wonders if this is why her grandfather brought her to the royal palace, admitting she had never heard of being engaged. Meanwhile, Prince Edward continues his tirade, adding that he dislikes red-headed women, finding them strong-willed. The young prince, still fuming, demands of his father that he does not want to be engaged to such a low-class woman, questioning her ability to speak. His father, a stern-looking man, calmly tells him to stop. He continued his outburst, suggesting Adrian be given to his younger brother, Jeremy, instead. His father, the Prince Edward's father, roared in fury at his son's insolence, while Adrian could only manage a small, pained sound. The Prince Edward's father's outburst was quickly overshadowed by the arrival of Duke Girardier, Adrian's grandfather, who angrily demanded to know how anyone dared to insult his precious granddaughter in such a manner. The Prince Edward's father, visibly flustered, immediately began to apologize profusely to the Duke. Despite his father's attempts to calm the situation, Prince Edward remained defiant, pointing a finger at the Duke and declaring that a mere Duke dared to threaten him, the first prince. The Duke, however, was not intimidated, retorting sharply that Prince Edward, who currently held no right to succession and was no different from a commoner, had no right to call him mere, especially as the honorary president of the House of Nobles. The Prince Edward's father could only watch in dismay as the argument escalated. Fueled by the prince's continued disrespect, the Duke declared with finality that he would not give his granddaughter to a man with such poor judgment and a rotten personality, asserting that they would be the ones to refuse the engagement. He then firmly took Adrian's hand, pulling her away from the scene. Both Prince Edward and his father stared, wide-eyed and aghast, as the Duke led Adrian away, the weight of the Duke's declaration settling heavily upon them. Moments later, the Prince Edward's father, now bowing deeply, continued to apologize to Adrian, acknowledging that the entire unfortunate incident was due to their shortcomings and pleading for her to calm her anger. The Duke, standing with his arms crossed, simply watched. As the apologies continued, Adrian, though outwardly composed, found herself thinking that the man was quite boring, still running his mouth. She offered a polite, "I'm very sorry," but her internal thoughts revealed a deeper disinterest. Her gaze drifted to a large tree outside the window, and she mused internally that it looked good for climbing. She then reflected on her disappointment, realizing she shouldn't have been lured by the word royal palace, as she had expected a castle and a prince like those in fairy tales, but found it surprisingly modest. She continued to gaze out, acknowledging that she was accustomed to putting on airs due to her position, but confessed to herself that she truly preferred playing outside. Lost in her thoughts, Adrian suddenly turned, startled, as a voice from behind her politely greeted her, calling her a beautiful princess. Her eyes widened slightly as the young boy introduced himself with a polite smile. "I am Roland, the only child of the Duke of Oriol," he stated, extending a hand. "May I have the honor of knowing your name?" She observed him, a thought forming in her mind. Asterisk, he is so cool and cute. This is a welcome change from that dimwit prince from earlier. This is the development I've been waiting for. Asterisk. Clearing her throat, she responded, "The pleasure is mine. I am Adrian, granddaughter of Duke Girardier. It's an honor to meet you, Lord Roland." He beamed in return. As their introductions concluded, he gestured towards a nearby tree. "By the way, that tree you were looking at earlier," he began. "Its top part is withered and dangerous." He then offered, "If you'd like, I can show you a place with other trees that are easier to climb." She looked at him, surprised. Her surprise was evident, but he continued, his hands open in an inviting gesture. "I'm also good at it," he declared, referring to tree climbing, as another young noble stood nearby, observing. With a hopeful expression, she clasped her hands together. "Please let me join you," she requested, her internal thoughts affirming, "Lord Roland is truly wonderful, isn't he?" Her positive thoughts about Roland triggered a memory, shifting the scene to a past event. A blonde maid, holding a bouquet of flowers, exclaimed with delight that Prince Edward had even sent flowers, a card, and cake to her, a mere maid. Adrian, younger, watched with a hint of surprise. The flashback continued, showing Prince Edward standing proudly with the blonde maid and another young noble. He declared himself strong and cool, a true gentleman, recounting how he had gallantly saved her from thieves. The maid, blushing, agreed, while the young noble looked on. Her eyes, now back in the present, narrowed slightly, a subtle shift in her expression. She reflected on the past, recalling that back then, she had thought Prince Edward might be all right. But now, she mused, he was merely an attendant to a dimwit prince and a weakling wrapped around some baron's daughter's finger, a stark contrast to the chivalrous figure she once remembered. Adrian, looking content, receives a bouquet of flowers and a letter, seemingly doing well after yesterday's events. Lady Ruin, observing her, reflects on Prince Edward, noting that he is far from a gentleman. She recalls how the engagement, which almost fell through, was formally accepted due to His Majesty the King's enthusiasm for Edward's future education and potential. She continues her internal monologue, expressing regret to His Majesty for her thoughts, wishing they had refused the engagement back then. In the end, it seems her grandfather had keen insight into the situation. Meanwhile, Roland excitedly tells young Master One that he heard from his father about Roland single-handedly crushing a group of thieves at the Lost Bell department store. Young Master One, wide-eyed with shock, internally questions if there must have been a mistake in Roland's education. He, beaming with pride, walks through a classroom, seemingly basking in the praise and attention from his peers. Young Master One, still reeling from Roland's revelation, tries to explain to him why he is panicking so much. They were not supposed to have been at the Lost Bell department store the day before yesterday. He clarifies that if it became public that the store easily allowed robbers to enter and endangered the sons and daughters of ducal houses, the Lost Bell owner's reputation would be completely ruined. Prince Edward is also shown, looking concerned by the unfolding conversation. Roland, however, continues to loudly discuss the incident, unaware that it is supposed to be under a gag order. Young Master One internally questions Roland's intelligence, while the narrator explains the severity of the situation. If the Lost Bell family, which accounts for 30% of the country's tax revenue, were to collapse, it would be a major problem. Therefore, officially, the incident is being reported as unruly demons rampaged, and civilians were caught up in it. Prince Edward's father sternly warns Roland that he must never speak of this incident again. Roland, confused, insists he heard directly from his father about the events. Young Master One, observing the exchange, wonders if Roland is confusing him with someone else, as he himself was not at the department store that day. Roland, quickly changing the subject, asks young Master One for advice on a gift for Miss Crystal to commemorate the upcoming spring festival. He suggests a ruby brooch, asking for young Master One's opinion. Young Master One internally notes that a ruby brooch is not little at all, implying its significant expense. He further reflects that Miss Crystal would probably be troubled if she suddenly received such an expensive item, and that ignoring one's fiancée to give gifts to an unrelated woman is insane. Despite his strong reservations, he decides to go along with it for now. Roland, realizing his mistake, apologizes to Miss Crystal for his wrong choice. Young Master One suggests emeralds or pearls instead, noting that she would surely be happy with just the thought itself. Roland then explains that emerald signifies fulfillment of love, and pearls signifies purity, both suitable for Miss Crystal, and promises to prepare the highest quality of both. Caught off guard, he saw Crystal approaching, her expression serious as she clutched her books. Prince Edward was already there, greeting her with a wide smile. He enthusiastically called out to Crystal, declaring that he had saved a seat for her again and urged her to sit beside him. Roland, observing the scene, felt a familiar irritation. As class began, marked by the ringing of a small bell, Crystal sat at her desk. Young Master One, seated nearby, pondered her presence. He acknowledged her beauty but questioned why she had suddenly been elevated to such a pedestal, especially among the salon members. Young Master One turned to Roland, who was still openly staring at Crystal, and remarked that his behavior was annoying. He explained that while he understood the sentiment, it was not admirable to stare at women. Roland, seemingly oblivious, simply asked if something was wrong, prompting young Master One to reflect on how terrifying it was to think he had seriously followed Roland until recently. Later, young Master One instructed maid Elena Qualiart that it seemed he should look into Crystal's situation again, specifically asking her to double-check Crystal's home life when she returned. A young boy, Jeremy, sits on his bed, gazing out the window of his grand room within a castle. The morning light streams in, illuminating the scattered books and various items on his bedside table. His hand slowly draws back the heavy curtains, revealing more of the world outside. As the curtains part, a memory surfaces. A younger version of himself, with wide, innocent eyes, observes two other boys in the courtyard below. One of them, a boy with dark hair, turns his back, while another watches him. The younger Jeremy, his expression now sharp with irritation, calls out to the dark-haired boy, Roland, urging him to leave. He complains that the other boy is always silently watching them, finding it unsettling. Roland, startled, acknowledges the command. The memory fades, and he stands with his back to the viewer, still looking out the window, a quiet intensity about it. He is Jeremy, the second prince, brother to Edward. His gaze is often distant, his expression unreadable. Meanwhile, Constance, Jeremy's fiancée, stands with a worried look, her brow furrowed with concern. She stands in a grand room filled with towering bookshelves and scattered tomes, observing Jeremy, who is seated at a desk amidst the literary chaos. A maid stands nearby, also surrounded by books. A teacup sits on a saucer, its surface reflecting the pensive face of Jeremy, his thoughts as deep and still as the liquid within. Constance, her face etched with distress, reported the conclusion of the operation at the Lost Bell department store. A maid stood silently nearby, observing her mistress's troubled expression. She continued, explaining that despite the significant commotion, there was unfortunately no damage to the Adlian's faction. Constance assured him that their involvement would not be exposed, as the direct perpetrators had already been dealt with. Jeremy listened, his expression unreadable, before simply asking for her next point. Constance affirmed that the Adlian's faction would continue to spread rumors, and that she would ensure no direct harm came to Crystal in the future. She then recalled a past conversation where she had been told that if she added substance to the rumors and cut off the Edward faction, they would surely fall. Constance admitted that while she did not mind taking on unpleasant tasks, the opposition was setting traps for them on their own. Jeremy, his gaze sharp, warned her to prioritize correctly this time. Overwhelmed by his words, Constance immediately dropped to her knees, bowing deeply and apologizing profusely. She promised that next time, she would deliver results that met his expectations. He simply hummed in response, then told her not to expect too much, his tone dismissive. As Constance reflected on her current predicament, a memory surfaced. A younger version of herself, holding a bouquet, was being told that her future as the second prince's fiancé was her destined path. She then saw her younger self observing a smiling young Jeremy alongside another boy, a gentle woman smiling in the background. It was then that she realized her childhood was over. She remembered how desperately she had wanted the position of the second prince's fiancé, even if it meant getting her hands dirty. Her younger self stood defiantly beside young Jeremy, while another girl secretly observed them from a distance. Despite the pain, she had begun to approach Jeremy for the sake of her family. Her younger self, distressed, bowed before him, formally introducing herself as Constance. In that moment, as her younger self looked up at young Jeremy in the book-filled room, a strange realization dawned upon her. Something felt amiss. She recalled the unsettling truth about Jeremy, a man whose eyes, even now, remained emotionless, dark, and murky. His room, filled with books and tools of sorcery, reflected a hidden darkness that seemed to confirm her deepest fears. She remembered a time when she, as a child, felt consumed by a similar darkness, a fear that seemed to swallow her whole as shadowy hands reached out from the periphery. In the present, the older man, likely her father, expressed his delight that she and Jeremy had grown closer, believing Jeremy to be a cautious and trustworthy partner. Jeremy offered a polite smile, while she remained quietly seated. Yet, her mind drifted back to another memory, a moment when she, as a child, knelt before a young Jeremy, who laughed cruelly. An older woman observed the scene from a distance, as the adult Constance sat, lost in thought. She observed Jeremy, engrossed in his studies, as he spoke of a certain noblewoman he was infatuated with, remarking that it was foolish to laugh at such things. Constance, concerned, inquired if the king was aware of this infatuation, and what the Adlian's faction, her fiancé, intended to do. She worried about a potential annulment. Jeremy replied that his father was still unaware and he had no intention of informing him. Jeremy then leaned in, a smirk playing on his lips, expressing surprise at her concern for Adlian's. He had assumed she would be pleased if the two were ruined, as it would allow her to obtain what she had always desired. His words struck Constance with a chilling realization. He had seen through her, understood her true intentions, even though she had said nothing aloud. Her eyes widened in shock and distress. Despite the unsettling revelation, she resolved to follow Jeremy's implied path, believing that if Adlian's and the other person were removed, Jeremy would ascend to the throne, and she would become queen. She walked away with determination, reflecting on her past efforts to discredit Adlian's, noting that the debate had started too soon. She reflected on the failure of her attempts to damage Adlian's reputation, realizing that her efforts to make him appear wounded and greedy for the throne had backfired. Jeremy, observing her, mused that the king's true intentions regarding the succession might be different than she assumed. He then stated that he would simply take what he wanted, regardless. Constance, engrossed in her studies, noticed a small, mechanical spider-like creature scuttling across the books, its presence unsettling her concentration. She recoiled in surprise, exclaiming at the sight of what she initially perceived as a spider. Jeremy, however, observed the device with a knowing gaze, declaring it was no mere insect but a magical tool designed for theft. He wondered aloud who would deploy such a thing. He then reacted with alarm, identifying the creature as a performer and demanding its capture. Meanwhile, a woman with dark hair, dressed in a practical, dark uniform, stood nearby, having just handed something to Jeremy. Constance looked on, her eyes wide with surprise, as the woman, now identified as an intruder, calmly acknowledged that she had been discovered. She then turned and began to walk away, her mission seemingly compromised. Outside, the woman, an agile infiltrator, moved with purpose, her long ponytail swaying as she prepared for action. Jeremy, still inside, shouted orders to apprehend her. She swiftly scaled the exterior wall of the building, demonstrating remarkable agility as guards below began to raise the alarm, shouting about an intruder and demanding she not escape. Continuing her rapid ascent, she evaded the pursuing guards, her movements fluid and precise amidst the foliage and architectural details of the structure. Her escape was abruptly challenged when she encountered a formidable two-headed guard dog, its fangs bared and eyes glowing ominously, blocking her path. Undeterred, she drew a dagger, her expression resolute, as she prepared to face the beast, acknowledging that the security was unexpectedly robust, especially with such a powerful guard dog. Elena, a maid with bandages adorning her arm and cheek, sat at a table, delicately sampling a small cake. She declared, with a hint of playful indignation, that she demanded compensation for her unreasonable request, her expression firm despite the sweet treat. Moments later, Elena stood before an older gentleman, concluding her detailed investigation report concerning the circle surrounding second Prince Jeremy. A young man and a young woman, both with wide, surprised eyes, listened intently to her findings. The young man, relieved, expressed his joy at seeing her more energetic than he had anticipated, admitting that when he first heard of her serious injuries, his heart had nearly stopped from worry. Elena, bowing gracefully, gratefully accepted the offer of an all-you-can-eat pork and cake dinner, promising to enjoy them at her leisure. The young man, still concerned, urged her not to overexert herself. As the conversation continued, the older gentleman gravely noted the decline in palace security. Elena confirmed his observation, stating that infiltration had been surprisingly lax. She then recounted a harrowing moment during her mission, flashing back to when the guard dog Cerberus had seized her arm, its fangs bared. She explained that a comb, a gift from her young master, had allowed her to break free from the monstrous beast, though the item itself was completely destroyed in the struggle. Back in the present, Elena lamented her momentary carelessness, acknowledging it as a mistake she would regret for life. With a radiant smile, Elena expressed her profound gratitude for the happiness she felt. The young man, returning her smile, thanked her for her hard work and promised to replace the broken comb. The group then settled into a more formal discussion, seated in a grand room, ready to delve into the full implications of what they had learned. The second Prince Jeremy, it was revealed, had secretly been plotting to bring about his elder brother's downfall, with his fiancée, Lady Constance, acting as his unwitting accomplice. Elena observed that those involved seemed to genuinely believe their relationship was good, while Lady Constance listened with a look of shock and dismay. Lady Constance, visibly distressed, pondered Lady Adrienne's feelings towards her, questioning if anyone would suspect her of plotting with the prince. Elena clarified that Constance's focus was less on Adrienne as an individual and more on securing her own position as the first prince's fiancée, driven by a frightening jealousy. She concluded that if the first prince were to fall, the second prince would ascend to the throne, and Lady Constance would then achieve her ambition of becoming queen. She continued her report, explaining that Prince Jeremy and Prince Edward had never truly gotten along. It was not surprising, then, that Prince Jeremy would seek an opportunity to rebel, especially knowing Prince Edward's infatuation with a woman other than his fiancée. He likely decided not to let this chance slip by. Elena emphasized that while Edward's people had been restraining him for their young master, who was useless in matters of love, this was the critical moment for a serious defense. Elena further elaborated, stating that if the engagement cancellation became a reality, it would be a perfect chance to bring down both Prince Edward and Lady Adrienne at once. Moreover, she warned that there was a risk their plan might even harm Lady Crystal, suggesting they needed to arrange protection for her as well. The maid, listening intently, expressed her relief that Lady Adrienne hadn't been injured in the recent Lost Bell department store incident. She found it difficult to believe Prince Jeremy was behind it, even if Lady Constance harbored a personal grudge. Elena, however, pointed out that the robbers' actions, taking hostages and proclaiming their ideology, were far too conspicuous, making too many unnecessary moves. She explained that because of those independent actions, the original goal was diverted, and the incident did not escalate into a major catastrophe. Elena speculated that the demons involved might have wanted to use the commotion to voice their dissatisfaction, suggesting that this part wasn't Jeremy's instruction but rather the demons acting on their own. The maid then realized that the dominant, Lord Dominic, whom the young master had seen on the way, might not have been a mistake after all. Elena confirmed that Lady Constance had indeed hired demons to attack the department store, specifically targeting Lady Adrienne, who was visiting for the exhibition. The maid, surprised, asked if Lord Dominic was involved in this incident as well. Elena considered it a possibility, explaining that the demons claimed to have multiple layers of people involved to avoid tracing back to the client. She then revealed that the owner of the Lost Bell department store was Lady Edith, Dominic's fiancée. The maid gasped, realizing Dominic's true motive. She concluded that he was trying to break off his engagement. Elena confirmed this, explaining that if the department store caused a scandal, Dominic could use it as an excuse to break off the engagement. He could have supported the robbers by leaking security information or through some other method, even if he didn't know the origin of the plan. Elena continued, stating that this assumption would explain why Lord Dominic was acting alone that day and how the robbers were able to infiltrate the priority elevator hall Lady Adrienne was using so precisely. She then shifted the focus, noting that they had been so preoccupied with Prince Edward's movements. But he was not the only one plotting to break off engagements. She emphasized that those infatuated with Crystal were numerous, and there was no guarantee that other individuals wouldn't do anything reckless in the future. A mental image of several young men, all seemingly admirers of Crystal, flashed through her mind. The maid, looking concerned, agreed with Elena's assessment. Elena, with a serious expression, concluded that they did not have the luxury of time. Elena, now standing in a more formal setting with the young master and the maid, addressed the next steps. She explained her initial plan was to monitor Prince Edward to prevent him from spiraling out of control, gather more information, and ultimately seek the king's judgment. However, she acknowledged that if this led to Prince Edward being disinherited, Prince Jeremy would naturally become the crown prince by moving up in line. Elena reflected on the possibility of Prince Jeremy's machinations causing confusion over the royal succession. She noted that the first prince lacked kingly qualities and was consumed by love, while the second prince had personality issues, acting on personal grudges. Furthermore, by law, a woman could not inherit the throne, complicating matters further. She continued, explaining that if they followed historical precedent, the throne would likely pass to Roland, her brother-in-law, through the unmarried third princess. Elena then recounted a past special case where a direct royal family was nearly wiped out, leaving only one remaining prince with royal blood, making him the nominal king. She also mentioned that the third princess was currently in isolation due to various circumstances, identifying her as Princess Rosaline, Prince Edward's sister, and Roland's stalker. Elena concluded that the current royal family was in an unavoidable checkmate. Elena further elaborated on the trouble surrounding Prince Edward's engagement cancellation, which was progressing beneath the surface. She warned that there was a possibility of someone attempting to eliminate Lady Adrian by pinning false charges on her, all out of love for the first prince. The elder statesman, Old Man A, acknowledged the precarious situation, realizing that in a scenario rife with behind-the-scenes maneuvering, it would be difficult to make a fair judgment if the king were to hear of it, especially after the king's indulgence had already led to such complications. The danger to Lady Adrian was clear. If such a plot succeeded, she would be completely isolated, with the entire country turned against her. Boise understood the gravity of the situation, realizing they needed to be extremely careful even if they brought this information directly to the king. He considered the evidence that Prince Edward was seeking to frame Crystal, or perhaps even fabricate it. He concluded that it would be better to keep their knowledge confidential until they could prepare counter-evidence to prove Adrian's innocence. He then inquired if there was a brilliant method that could quickly resolve everything. Elena, with a knowing look, confirmed that she had such a plan. As she spoke, Boise felt a growing sense of unease, as if the very gears of fate were creaking louder than usual, hinting at something terrible that might happen. Elena, with a dramatic flourish, proposed a method that would solve all their problems quite simply. She explained that if the current royal family proved useless, custom dictated that the next king would be selected from among the nobility, including the ducal houses. Given that Lady Adrian of the Garipur ducal house had the closest blood ties to the royal family, she would have the strongest claim. He absorbed this revelation, realizing the full implication. Lady Adrian could become queen, and his brother-in-law could become king. The elder statesman, Old Man A, and Constance both agreed that, in terms of possibility, it was not impossible. Constance, in particular, seemed delighted by the prospect. He questioned if this radical plan wasn't akin to usurping the throne, suggesting that even as a joke, such things should not be said. Elena and Constance countered, emphasizing that their first consideration was the life and safety of his brother-in-law, the territory, and the people who supported the Oriole family. They asserted that if the royal family became an obstacle in that process, it was their duty to correct it. She, with a confident stance, questioned Boise's pessimism about becoming king. She suggested it was a dream for many, offering a life of luxury and the establishment of a harem. Elena then asked if he was content with such a middling position, implying he lacked ambition. He, however, vehemently rejected the idea of arbitrarily becoming king, stating that as a law-abiding citizen, he could not condone such a reckless act. He reiterated that he had no desire for the throne, despite Elena's earlier mention of loopholes in the succession law. He sighed, urging them not to get ahead of themselves. Elena, undeterred, pointed out that it was legally possible to become king even without being a direct prince of the current royal family. She then challenged him, asking if he believed the foolish first prince or the rebellious second prince should be responsible for the country's future. Two older men present nodded in agreement with Elena's assessment. She continued, asserting that the throne was practically falling into his lap and he should consider it a viable option. She observed that he was an indecisive hero, always overthinking things, while others around them seemed to treat the matter as if it was not their problem. He sat alone, deep in thought, reflecting on Elena's words. He acknowledged that the hero chosen by the divine sword was surprisingly cautious and timid on the inside, pondering what he was truly supposed to do to prevent an impending catastrophe. Previously, a ridiculously large holy sword was given to him at a young age. The moment he held it, it fit his hand as if it were a part of his very body. He immediately understood that he was the one chosen by this sword. Despite the ancient tales of epic battles between heroes and demon lords, he had never needed to use the holy sword in the peaceful world of today. That changed, however, when His Highness Edward was attacked by assassins. He was by his side and instantly summoned Belgrand. And then, in a flash, he wiped out all the assassins, their bodies falling around him as the holy sword glowed with destructive power. His Highness was extremely excited, praising his power and declaring him his amazing right-hand man. He, in turn, felt a profound relief that he had been able to save His Highness. Later, he walked away from the grand mansion, his steps heavy and his gaze downcast. He sat alone, hands trembling, as he became terrified of the power he possessed, a power that could so easily take human lives. As he pondered his fears, a young girl approached him, calling out to him as brother-in-law. It was Renee. Renee looked at him directly, asking what he truly wished to achieve with that power. Roland, with a serious expression, contemplated the path before him, to become engaged to Lady Adrian and legally ascend to the throne as king. An unseen voice prompted him, questioning his thoughts. Renee, exasperated, questioned if they were still discussing the same topic, finding it utterly exhausting. However, one of the women present countered, asserting that the real challenge was conveying Roland's good qualities to His Highness, especially after his previous failure at the department store. Renee, undeterred, declared that this was precisely where their true efforts would begin. Roland, looking distressed, reminded them that their original objective was to awaken His Highness and protect Lady Adrian from an unjust engagement cancellation. He lamented that their goals and methods had strayed too far from that initial purpose. Renee, with a mischievous glint in her eyes, proposed a simpler solution. If Lady Adrian were spared a life with an idiot, wouldn't that be a swift and happy resolution? She imagined Prince Edward as a love-struck fool, suggesting that he was the root of all their current commotion, and eliminating his influence would resolve everything. Roland could only sigh in response. He stood, gesturing emphatically, and declared that the situation was far from simple. An engagement was absolutely out of the question, he insisted, as he couldn't even reconcile with Lady Adrian, let alone consider such a thing. He warned them not to joke about it. The woman then observed Roland, noting his popularity but also his passivity when it came to romance, playfully questioning if he preferred men. Roland looked utterly shocked. She mused that she would likely receive his cold look and a slap again. Renee pointed out his stunned expression. Roland quickly clarified that at the time, His Highness simply disliked Adrian, and anyone else would have been acceptable. Renee, seizing the opportunity, then exclaimed that there was even a story about His Highness Edward proposing to Roland in the past, dramatically suggesting they make Roland his official wife. Roland vehemently protested, asserting his masculinity. Renee, with a serious demeanor, confirmed that such rumors about the young master were indeed circulating, and even a secret society was selling related items. Roland, taken aback, questioned if there were truly such rumors about him and demanded to know more about this secret society, hoping it was all a joke. Roland, utterly bewildered, asked about the ship of the slasher. Renee, maintaining her serious expression, clarified that it was precisely the secret club known as Slasher Ship Fujoshi Love Affairs. Roland, still processing the information, murmured that he understood. Renee then explained that Fujoshi referred to women who arbitrarily paired up gentlemen in their fantasies and engaged in same-sex creative activities. She then presented a vivid, imagined image of Roland and Prince Edward in a romantic embrace, causing Roland to exclaim in horror, "Why?" Renee continued, instructing him to remember that in Fujoshi circles, young master was considered the top, the one who embraced, while His Highness Edward was the bottom, the one being embraced. The new business of the secret club involved creating and secretly selling explicit fanfiction, known as doujinshi, featuring the two of them. He could only manage a choked didant, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. His plea went unheard as the conversation continued, with Renee expressing her doubt that such things were possible, while Woman C vehemently declared that selling such content without permission was impossible. He could only utter a confused sound as Woman C clarified that these were all images, dismissing his concerns. Renee then added, with a knowing smile, that if he was a beautiful confidant, dedicating his entire being to the prince was the proper course, while Woman C countered, asserting that a beautiful confidant serving the prince was true beauty. His shock deepened as Renee continued, proclaiming that if he was the legendary hero, he should be ready to embrace anyone, whoever they might be. She then added, with a blush, that with his cute appearance, which even made men propose to him, he was clearly meant to be the one who was loved. Meanwhile, Old Man B calmly poured tea, seemingly oblivious to the intense discussion. Renee, however, pressed on, explaining that because he knew the prince inside and out, delving deep into his worries and sorrows with a heart deeper than the sea, he would embrace him with his heart and body. He recoiled, covering his head in distress as Renee continued her vivid description, detailing how with his delicate body, the brother-in-law would receive His Highness's excitement. He pressed his hands firmly over his ears, his face contorted in a grimace of regret, wishing he had covered them a bit earlier. Renee, observing his distress, looked down, a bead of sweat forming on her temple, perhaps realizing the extent of his discomfort. She then held up a hand, suggesting they call a truce for now, as Woman C, walking away, declared that there was no end to this argument. Woman C, now seated and writing with a quill, continued her philosophical musings, stating that as the legendary masked author Christine Goda-sensei once said, there was no need for a climax, conclusion, or meaning. With her eyes closed and a serene smile, she expressed her contentment. For her, it was enough as long as the gentlemen they loved were united and happy. Her eyes then opened, and she suddenly realized she had forgotten something important. Elena looked on, surprised by the sudden shift in her demeanor. Elena, now holding a book, acknowledged the genius of Christine Sensei, who had revolutionized the industry in just a year with concepts like Gentleman's Secret Hole and Gentleman's Secret Juice. Renee, equally enthusiastic, agreed to a truce with Elena, understanding the gravity of their shared passion. Just as they reached this understanding, Roland, looking utterly flustered, interrupted their intense discussion, asking if their conversation was finally over. Elena and Renee turned to him, a hint of annoyance on their faces. He then tried to deflect blame, asserting that the conversation had gone off track because his brother-in-law was such a coward. Elena, however, ignored his protestations and proposed a new strategy to Renee. They should disregard Roland's will entirely and begin laying the groundwork by informing the Empress Dowager about the first and second prince's lack of prospects. Renee, considering Elena's drastic suggestion, agreed that it was getting troublesome. She then proposed a more direct, clean, and simple solution to quickly dispose of both the first and second princes. Elena, however, cautioned against rushing, suggesting they keep such a dangerous option as a last resort, or at least fifth to last, and remove all other dangerous options from their list first. As they spoke, Roland sat in the background, the clicking sound of gears echoing in his mind, like the countdown of a time bomb. Crystal, a young woman of noble bearing, found herself approached by Firmin Gregoire Renek, who extended an invitation to a soiree that evening. She politely declined, stating it would be presumptuous for someone like her to attend. Her expression remained one of polite refusal, even as Firmin stood in the background, seemingly accepting her answer. Moments later, Lord Dominic Erhard Ilmash approached her, inviting her on a voyage aboard his family's ship. Crystal, with a gentle smile, again politely declined, citing a lack of time for such a leisurely trip. Immediately after, Maximilian Firmin Chaminade, with an enthusiastic grin, offered her a relaxing vacation in the port city of his domain, to which she also gave a soft refusal. She continued to apologize profusely to Maximilian, explaining that she was unable to take an extended break. He reacted with visible disappointment, sighing at her repeated refusal. Crystal, meanwhile, appeared increasingly flustered by the persistent invitations. Her distress became more apparent as she loudly apologized, explaining that she had an urgent matter to attend to. With a final, hurried bow, she excused herself and rushed away down the grand hallway, leaving the nobleman behind. As Crystal departed, Adolphe Rainer Charpentier, standing with Estelle Louis Barbastro, remarked on her repeated refusals, noting that she was entirely different from other women who easily gave in to such invitations. Estelle, observing Crystal Rita Chesty as she walked away, mused that she was like a fairy who had descended upon their academy, a creature of unique and elusive charm. She continued her hurried pace, oblivious to the whispers of two noble women observing her from a distance. One remarked that the girl was once again approaching the young nobles, while the other scoffed, claiming she was merely flirting because of her pretty face. As she entered a grand building, the rumors of her seducing men and living a life of luxury at their expense echoed in her mind, causing her to sigh deeply. Her expression was fraught with distress as she pondered how her life had come to this point. Then, one day, she suddenly regained memories of her past life. She stared at her reflection in a mirror, a look of profound shock on her face as she realized the person staring back was Crystal. The realization struck her with full force. She was Crystal, the heroine from the OTOME game, Rainbow Romanesque. Overwhelmed with joy, she exclaimed that she had won at life, believing she had been reborn as the heroine of an OTOME game. However, her excitement was so intense that she stumbled and fell to the floor with a thud. Lying on the floor, she clutched her head in despair, muttering, "Impossible." She recalled the game's plot, where the heroine was bullied by villainous characters while pursuing love, eventually becoming the queen of a great nation. She lamented that such a fate was impossible for a commoner like her, fearing she would die from the stress of it all. She remembered her past life, where she believed she had died in a bathtub due to an unhealthy lifestyle, deeming it pathetic. Even though she had become a beautiful girl in appearance, the thought of talking to handsome guys without a screen between them felt like an insurmountable hurdle for a long-time shut-in otaku like her. With a determined yet anxious expression, she considered her options. She did not know if events would unfold exactly as they did in the original story, but perhaps she should preemptively avoid raising any flags. She had resolved to avoid the Noble Academy for now, believing that if she had no contact with the main characters, no flags would be raised. She observed the group of handsome male students from a distance, determined to keep her distance. However, despite her firm resolve, it felt as if someone was manipulating events, forcing her to transfer to the Noble Academy, just as it happened in the game. She looked at her reflection, thinking she should at least be content with being reborn with such a pleasant face. She gazed up at the Grand Academy building, a look of distress on her face, questioning why this was happening to her. Still, she found herself observing the handsome princes and noble sons in person, admitting that Prince Edward truly possessed a good face. The experience was, to put it mildly, amazing. She reassured herself, believing that as long as she didn't interact with them, even if they were at the same school, everything should be fine. A sense of relief washed over her. Amidst her observations of the handsome boys from afar, she managed to make some new friends. She listened as one of them, Renee, mentioned seeing Lord Dominic and Lord Roland walking together earlier, an unusual combination. Crystal mused internally that otaku existed in every world, finding a strange comfort in the thought. Despite her initial worries about how things would turn out, she realized this second life was proving to be super fun, truly the best. Suddenly, her expression, along with that of a male student beside her, shifted to one of wide-eyed surprise. He then reached out and gently took her hand, his gaze fixed intently upon her. Her eyes widened in alarm, and she let out a shocked gasp. She stumbled, losing her footing and falling forward, prompting an immediate, frantic apology from Maximilian, who reached out in concern. He looked at her with an earnest expression, while she, despite the awkwardness, internally recognized him as Roland from the game, marveling at his unexpected cuteness up close. She reflected on the inherent danger of making contact with any of the capture targets, a risk she had desperately tried to avoid. Yet, despite her best efforts, she found herself constantly encountering them, and before she knew it, every single one had developed a liking for her, aggressively pursuing her affections. She sighed, acknowledging the present reality. She recalled the game's ending, where, in the harem route, all the rainbow nobles would break their engagements with their respective fiancés and pledge their love to the heroine at the graduation party. However, she understood that such an outrageous ending, while acceptable in a game, would in reality be a catastrophe capable of destroying the entire country. She considered the villainous characters from the game, realizing that in the real world, they were all genuinely kind individuals. If their engagements were to be cancelled because of her, she knew she would be consumed by guilt, recognizing that it was only natural for them to be upset if their fiancés suddenly took interest in another woman. She had been desperately trying to avoid raising any flags that would attract the capture targets, but everything had backfired. No matter what she did, everyone seemed to fall for Crystal, and she found it terrifying to have someone develop feelings for her after just a few meetings in reality. However, she noted that while most individuals, like the others, initially showed interest, there was one person who, from a certain day, began to observe her from a distance with a more analytical gaze. This individual was Roland Valerie Oriole. She felt grateful that at least one target's interest had seemingly cooled, though she still couldn't understand why his behavior had suddenly changed. She found solace in the Academy's library, a quiet, dusty place that nobles rarely frequented, making it a perfect hideout for her transcription work. She was glad this dull job wasn't popular, allowing her to have the library to herself at this hour. She reflected on her precarious position, a noble in name only, her family's title bought generations ago. With minimal financial support, she had to take on transcription work to make ends meet, acknowledging the harsh reality of being a heroine. As she adjusted her quill, she resolved to tackle the next task, her focus sharp on the work ahead. Finally, she stretched, concluding her work for the day. She gazed at the romantic illustrations she had created, a secret hobby that, despite being just that, generated surprisingly good sales. More importantly, she knew there were readers eagerly awaiting her next contribution. Her gaze then fell upon a particular drawing, and a thought surfaced. Lord Roland, huh? She wondered if he might have somehow perceived her true identity in this world, especially considering he was the legendary. The tale unfolds in Chapter 9, chronicling the hidden exploits of hero Ran, an attendant whose quiet demeanor belies a formidable destiny. 5 years prior, within the Demon Lord's autonomous territory, the 169th Demon, Lord Yami Onyankopon-sama, urgently implored the hero of the Divine Sword to suppress a burgeoning rebellion led by the Demon Grand Duke and his faction. She explained that despite her efforts, some still clung to notions of demon pride and sought to enforce their will through brute power. Information had reached her that the Dorrance Demon Grand Duke's faction, the most radical among them, was planning a full-scale riot, and she wished for the hero of the Divine Sword to preempt this uprising. The young attendant, Ran, pondered her request, then questioned why the Demon Lord herself wouldn't directly handle a dispute among demons. Onyankopon, however, seemed less than enthusiastic about the prospect, wondering internally if this wasn't precisely the hero's legendary cue for a demon rebellion. Ran, for his part, silently questioned if such a sentiment was appropriate for a demon lord, especially one rumored to coexist with a hero and possess enough power to counter such threats. He then voiced his true desire, stating that he would rather avoid unnecessary bloodshed if at all possible, a fleeting image of bloodied hands flashing through his mind. Onyankopon conceded that she could indeed stop the rebellion herself. However, she explained that if she, the demon lord, were to forcibly subdue her direct subordinates, it might only provoke further resentment from the radicals and lead to even more rebellions in the future. She continued, emphasizing that such an outcome could result in innocent bystanders shedding unnecessary blood. Furthermore, she declared that she was not one of those old-fashioned demons who believed in suppressing others through sheer force. Instead, Onyankopon revealed her preference for handling matters properly, earning money, and then using that money to silence dissent. She asserted that in this day and age, money equated to justice, a statement that left Rand somewhat taken aback. Onyankopon then casually mentioned that she had already secured permission from the Great Temple of the Holy Faith. She believed the rebels simply did not comprehend the true power of the Divine Sword hero. Ran, now appearing older and wielding a massive sword, declared that if they were to demonstrate the overwhelming power that could stand against demons and the Demon Lord, the rebels should calm down. He stood before the Demon Lord Onyankopon as she reminded him that great power carried great responsibility, questioning if it wasn't time for him to properly utilize his own. He gazed at his outstretched hands, a quiet murmur escaping his lips as he pondered the nature of his power. Still lost in thought, he heard Onyankopon's voice, asking him, "Brother-in-law, what do you wish to achieve with that power?" His expression remained serious, a brief memory of his younger self and a small girl flashing through his mind, as Onyankopon declared her understanding. With a radiant smile, she affirmed his role as the true Divine Sword hero. He, in turn, resolved to wield his sword if it meant everyone could live peacefully, though he hoped this would be the last time. Onyankopon then entrusted him with a highly sensitive, secret mission to deal with the Demon Grand Duke's faction, stressing the need for discretion. She then moved closer, suggesting such missions would be rare, before playfully proposing that he spend the rest of his life with her. He reacted with a startled "huh," as she explained that if the hero and Demon Lord united, no one could oppose them, leading to a more peaceful world. He remained flustered by the suddenness of her words. However, her demeanor quickly shifted back to seriousness as she realized such an alliance would only breed resentment among demons, causing her to retract her offer. She then abruptly asked him to assist with some paperwork, deeming his presence perfect for the task. He cautiously inquired if it was appropriate for him to view state secrets, but she dismissed his concerns, asking if he could use an abacus. He confirmed his ability. Holding an abacus, Onyankopon lamented the uselessness of her muscle-head subordinates who couldn't even operate one, while he, now also equipped with an abacus, listened intently. He mused internally about the arbitrary nature of what people considered a state secret, his gaze fixed on the documents. His fingers moved with practiced ease, swiftly manipulating the beads of the abacus, a testament to his unexpected skill. He found himself 1 year in the past, in the royal capital, standing beside a young woman with a flower in her hair. Suddenly, a maid rushed towards him and the young woman, calling out to him as young master. He looked around, confused by the commotion, while the young woman noted the unusual noise outside. The maid, Elena, explained with urgency that a behemoth from a sideshow had escaped, causing chaos. He reacted with shock, realizing the gravity of the situation, while Elena stressed the need for immediate action to prevent harm to the people. The young woman expressed her concern that the anti-monster security squad would likely not arrive in time. He understood the implication, realizing the immediate danger. He stood silently for a moment, contemplating the situation, then declared that he had no choice but to intervene and stop the creature himself. He let out a sigh, accepting the task. As he prepared to depart, the young woman wished him good luck, addressing him as brother-in-law. Elena confirmed she understood his instructions to explain the situation to the sideshow owner. The young woman then mused that it had been a while since he had summoned the divine sword, recalling his suppression of the Dorrance Grand Duke's rebellion. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, a princess with long, flowing hair was being urgently directed to safety by a maid, who pointed the way. The princess, looking back with concern, was warned to watch out and run away. The world was once again plunged into chaos by the rampaging behemoth, its monstrous form a terrifying sight. A young woman, her eyes wide with shock, witnessed the unfolding destruction. Previously, a rebellion had erupted within the Demon Lord's autonomous territory, instigated by the Demon Lord's own request. Amidst this turmoil, a young man, wielding a formidable sword, stood protectively before the same young woman, having saved the princess from the behemoth's rampage in the royal capital. He turned to her, his expression concerned, and asked if she had sustained any injuries. She, still reeling from the events, could only stammer in response. Later, the young man, now identified as Roland, arrived at a grand estate, clutching a bouquet of flowers. He was greeted warmly by another young man, Prince Edward, who invited him inside. As they walked through the opulent hallway, Roland apologized for inadvertently drawing attention to himself, even if his actions were spontaneous. Prince Edward, however, dismissed his apology, acknowledging that Roland had saved many people with the divine sword. Roland then expressed regret for causing trouble for Princess Rosaline as well. Prince Edward reassured him, stating there was no need for modesty, as he had acted heroically and should be proud. He added that Rosaline herself had recounted Roland's remarkable achievements. Roland attempted to downplay the situation, explaining that he merely happened to be present, but gossip magazines had sensationalized the events, creating a story even grander than the behemoth's subjugation. The headlines falsely depicted him, Prince Edward's right-hand man, on a holiday date with Princess Rosaline. Prince Edward then announced that Rosaline had come to visit Roland, who looked surprised. Edward quickly added that Rosaline didn't seem to mind the gossip at all, as the princess herself entered the room. Rosaline, her face beaming with delight, declared that she had been eagerly anticipating his visit. Roland, caught off guard by her intense enthusiasm, could only manage a small, startled sound. Her brother, observing the scene, reflected that Rosaline had become infatuated with Roland, and he had anticipated the day Roland might become his brother-in-law. However, he then revealed that Rosaline had unfortunately fallen ill after that, a concerning development that Roland acknowledged with a somber expression. He stood before Roland, explaining that Princess Rosaline seemed fine, but the doctors and his father had declared her unable to receive visitors due to her illness. Roland, concerned, inquired if a decision had been made regarding her condition. His expression remained thoughtful, a slight smile playing on his lips as he processed the information. A flashback revealed a grand tournament where an announcer declared Roland the winner of the XXDH Royal Capital Swordsmanship Tournament, claiming his 4th consecutive victory as the absolute champion. Prince Edward, beaming, praised Roland's excellent performance, declaring him a right-hand man he could always be proud of. He continued, expressing high expectations for Roland in the future. Turning to Dominic, he acknowledged his excellence, but pointed out that his sword skills still required improvement. Dominic humbly apologized. Roland, meanwhile, mused internally that facing the hero of the divine sword made it impossible for anyone else to stand a chance. He then stated that those with power possessed the right to display it. Dominic, with a resigned expression, conceded the point. As he walked away, Roland sighed internally, reflecting on the obvious power difference in the tournaments. He wished to stop participating soon, despite His Highness's desire for him to continue winning. He found the constant praise and the embarrassing nickname, Absolute Champion Roland, less conspicuous than simply swinging his sword around town. He understood that His Highness merely wished to showcase how excellent his attendant truly was. Dominic approached Roland, congratulating him on his victory, but asking him to stop using a certain title. Roland thanked him. Dominic then mentioned that His Highness was very pleased, having called Roland his excellent right-hand man. Roland simply acknowledged the information. He then confessed to Roland that he sometimes wondered what it would be like to have been born with overwhelming power, a strength far beyond that of ordinary people. Roland looked at him, listening intently. As he walked away, Roland heard Prince Edward's voice, instructing him to go quickly, as His Highness, the hero of the divine sword, was waiting. He acknowledged that the immense power he wielded was an inherent part of him, a gift he was born with. Yet, he found that possessing such power presented its own unique and significant challenges. Ran observed Elena, who cradled the two young girls, Onyankopon and Rosaline, as they slept soundly. Elena appeared utterly exhausted, her head resting on the bed, while Ran looked on with a mixture of concern and tenderness. Moments later, Ran stood with his arms crossed, deep in thought, as Elena explained the situation. He seemed to be processing a significant realization. She clarified that the girls were now resting in their room, having been utterly worn out from running around since dawn. The two young princesses, Onyankopon and Rosaline, lay peacefully asleep, their faces serene. Elena then recounted the past, explaining how she had discovered Noelle and Blanche in the desolate wasteland and subsequently brought them to the attendant's mansion. Despite the presence of soldiers nearby, she had managed to take them under her care. She continued, describing how Noelle and Blanche had been utterly terrified, perceiving her as a threat. Nevertheless, she had taken them under her protection, determined to shield them. Ran questioned her, asking if escaping the castle was truly so terrible, or if their education and upbringing had simply been inadequate. Elena responded with a somber expression, suggesting that perhaps her methods had been too harsh, and she could not be blamed for her lack of knowledge in teaching them. A vivid memory surfaced, showing a young Blanche, her face contorted in tears, confessing that she had been terribly scared. In the present, Elena clutched at her skirt, her thoughts heavy with the realization that she had assumed the castle was a safe haven. Yet, these 6-year-old children had endured such profound suffering that their only desire was to escape. As they stood in a room lined with bookshelves, Elena informed Ran that a messenger from His Highness Michael had arrived. Ran, looking surprised, inquired about the purpose of His Highness's message. She listened intently as the messenger from Prince Michael delivered his report, stating that regarding the current matter, Marquis Weiss had been appointed as the royal family's security officer. He added that Prince Michael and Prince Francis seemed to be deeply concerned. Moments later, Ran turned to her, addressing her as Charlotte, and asked her to come closer. She promptly affirmed her understanding, and he seemed visibly relieved by her presence. He stood with a serious expression, his gaze distant, while the messenger remained respectfully in the background. The messenger then bowed deeply, introducing himself as Francis, Marquis Weiss. Both Ran and Elena looked on with surprise, realizing the true identity of their visitor. Marquis Weiss offered a warm smile, greeting her by her full name, Charlotte Weiss, and acknowledging their long acquaintance. She returned his greeting with a slight bow, her expression a mix of deference and slight apprehension. As they settled into the opulent room, Marquis Weiss addressed Ran, acknowledging the efforts of Lucian Francis in the recent events. Ran listened with a somber expression as the Marquis explained that Prince Michael had taken full responsibility for the royal family's oversight in the matter, conveying his words directly. Ran then turned to Elena, a smile gracing his lips, expressing his admiration for her actions in protecting the two young ones and asking for details. She humbly replied that she had simply done what was within her power. He then pondered aloud the severity of the treatment that had driven the young princes and princesses to such a desperate escape, noting that Prince Michael himself was deeply troubled by the situation. Marquis Weiss concluded by revealing that the education of the two princesses had been entrusted to a noblewoman, who had been formally appointed as their educator. The educator, highly recommended by the Queen, diligently began the princesses' education. Her curriculum, however, proved exceptionally advanced and particularly challenging for Princess Blanche. Her strict educational approach, intended to foster the twins' academic improvement and earn the Queen's trust, caused Princess Rosaline to visibly shrink in distress. Meanwhile, Prince Edward, though not directly involved in their education, frequently observed the princess's progress. He entered the room, his expression one of concern. He noticed the educator's methods were causing the princesses considerable discomfort, a fact that deeply troubled him. As a result of the educator's persistent and condescending manner, Prince Edward and Prince Dominic found themselves in a difficult position. They questioned her methods, but she seemed to dismiss their concerns. The princes, seemingly overwhelmed by the educator's unwavering demeanor, knelt before her, expressing a desire to learn from her themselves. Princess Rosaline, Princess Blanche, Ran, and Onyankopon watched the scene unfold with wide eyes, a mix of shock and amusement on their faces. Prince Edward later confided that he had noticed the educator's frequent bad moods and Princess Blanche's increasing despondency, yet he and Prince Dominic had been unable to say anything to her. He explained to Ran and Prince Dominic that they had been silenced, perhaps because the educator was the only person within the castle walls they could truly trust with their hearts. In the princess's room, a letter had been left behind, simply stating, "We're sorry for the trouble." Elena, reflecting on the letter, realized that the princesses had gone to such lengths as to leave a note, specifically naming her, precisely because they did not want to cause trouble, and thus had been unable to speak their true feelings until the very last moment. Prince Edward carefully read a letter, its contents revealing that the Queen held the custody rights over the two princesses, a decision even Prince Michael, their mother, could not oppose. The letter concluded with a plea for understanding regarding the circumstances that prevented certain actions. Meanwhile, Onyankopon spoke with Ran, instructing him to convey to His Highness that he should not worry excessively. Ran acknowledged her words with a nod. Prince Edward then explained to Onyankopon that the royal family had, in fact, decided to dismiss the princess's educator. Following this decision, the lady educator bowed deeply, acknowledging her failure and tendering her resignation. She stated that if her actions had brought shame upon the Queen, she must step down. She also mentioned holding a letter of apology from Noelle and others, which she would deliver at a later time. Onyankopon then remarked that the two princesses likely had no peace of mind at that moment, before inquiring about the plans for their future. As the discussion continued, Ran, now seated beside Onyankopon, suggested that if it were acceptable, Francis could temporarily take care of Noelle and Blanche. Prince Edward then clarified to Onyankopon that while he personally had no objection, the future policy was still under consideration, and there was a distinct possibility that Prince Michael might gain custody rights. She, surprised, inquired about His Highness. A realization then dawned on her. Prince Michael was the next king, and it would be quite convenient for him to possess the custody rights. She pressed further, asking if His Highness was truly serious, and if he genuinely believed that things would not revert to how they were before. With a slight smile, she finally agreed, stating that while he was young, Lucian Francis would temporarily take charge of Noelle and Blanche's education. Lucian Francis, Marquis Weiss, sat on an ornate sofa, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face as he expressed his gratitude. His hand moved gracefully across a sheet of paper, pinning a letter, its contents a formal acknowledgement of the recent arrangements. Later, as he walked outside, a familiar voice called out to him. Onyankopon, the demon lord, approached, asking why he was there. He turned to her, a serious expression replacing his earlier smile, and she questioned if he knew that Prince Michael had been aware of the two princesses leaving the castle. She explained that her task at the time had been to find the princesses, and the places they frequented were not those typically visited by castle residents. She had found them behind the infirmary, at a graveyard. It was the resting place of their mother, and other locations they visited before being taken in by the royal family were similarly unusual. She then asked him if he had known all along that the two would eventually leave the castle. He confirmed that he had, clarifying that Prince Michael, specifically, had known. She pressed further, asking if Prince Michael had also been the one to make the request that day. He affirmed it. Elsewhere, a voice noted that a different prince had once witnessed Noelle attempting to remove the bars from her window. This prince, identified as Edward, stood with Noelle and Blanche, explaining that while he could not directly assist them, he had instead taught them how to dismantle the bars. He then asked them where they wished to go, prompting them to research potential escape locations. Noelle, with her arms crossed, looked annoyed. A formal document, bearing a distinctive G seal, detailed a guild request. It outlined a task to locate Princess Weiss, ensuring she could be found if needed, and confirmed that the guild had been entrusted with teaching her the location. Elena, who was Princess Weiss, acknowledged the revelation, stating that it was indeed a roundabout method. Ran, with a gentle smile, apologized for the indirect approach, then inquired about something else. Her eyes widened in shock, and she gasped, covering her mouth with a hand. She questioned if Princess Weiss was truly to become a maid again. He smiled, explaining that the matter was not yet settled. He added that if Princess Noelle and Princess Blanche were to plead with him, he too wished to return to being a childcare maid. Elena, still surprised, declared that she would go speak with Lucian. Ran encouraged her, assuring her that she would surely be fine. With a determined expression, she then turned and ran off, leaving the building. As she ran, a sudden realization struck her. She had been careless. She thought that if the twins were entrusted to the Marquis, she could rest easy, but then she questioned the meaning of her own role as a maid. She paused, then turned, deciding to seek out Lucian. She cautiously approached a door, peeking inside to observe the room's occupants. Her eyes widened slightly, a hint of surprise on her face as she took in the scene before her. Inside, Ran lay stretched out on a plush sofa, his eyes closed, while Elena stood beside him, looking down with a concerned expression. She realized he must have been exhausted, noting how peacefully he slept. She wondered if there was a blanket or something similar nearby to cover him. Elena paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. Is he? She wondered, her search for Lucian momentarily sidetracked by the unexpected quiet. She found Ran asleep on a sofa, his form completely still. Beside him, Onyankopon observed the scene, remarking that Ran seemed to be acting like a twin, using a cushion as a pillow. Her surprise was evident as she stared at the sleeping figure, a blush creeping onto her cheeks. He remained deeply asleep, his hand near his mouth, a soft murmur escaping his lips. Observing him, Elena felt a warmth spread through her. She thought to herself that while she could never say it directly, his sleeping face was incredibly cute, almost as endearing as her younger brother Noelle or Princess Blanche. She gently reached out, her fingers brushing through his hair. He had endured so much, she mused, carrying the weight of his position since he was 20 years old. She then considered how her return to maid duties might offer him even a small measure of strength or relief. Suddenly, he stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Charlotte, he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep, startling Elena. He continued to speak, still half asleep, calling her Lottie, and expressing how he had always wanted to call her that. He then added that Princess Noelle and Princess Blanche were so beautiful. Elena, flustered, confirmed her name was Lottie. His eyes snapped wide open, a sudden, intense realization dawning upon him. He looked up, his eyes wide with surprise, as Elena, blushing deeply, stared back at him. He asked her what she was doing. A sudden realization struck him, and he recoiled, flustered, as he noticed his hand still clasped around hers. He stammered apologies, explaining that he had been rude to touch a woman while she was resting. She, equally flustered, remarked that his hand had been warm and questioned what he was talking about. Both of them covered their faces, overwhelmed by embarrassment. Elena, however, felt a surge of memory, realizing she had always wanted him to call her Lottie. Moments later, his expression brightened with a smile as he declared, "Ah, hired." She, still blushing but now beaming, confirmed her desire to discuss her re-employment. She enthusiastically affirmed that it was only natural for her to serve as his maid, asserting that he had simply forgotten how things were before, and that her presence by his side was a matter of course. He, once again flustered, covered his face and asked her to forget his recent words, attributing them to his grogginess from waking up. She looked at him, still confused. A series of knocks interrupted their awkward exchange. He quickly composed himself, announcing that it was time for Lucian's meal. Then, addressing her as Charlotte, he insisted she stay and eat dinner, as it was already late. Some time passed, and she, now dressed in her maid uniform, walked alongside another maid and the lady educator. The educator remarked on her return as a nanny maid, to which she cheerfully agreed, stating her hunger. He watched them from a distance. He stood alone, arms crossed, his gaze following the departing maids, a thoughtful expression on his face. The lady educator, however, turned her head slightly, a look of surprise and subtle suspicion crossing her features as she observed the situation. Rand sat on the plush couch, his hand covering his face as a deep sigh escaped him, clearly flustered by recent events. As he remained in his state of embarrassment, Elena approached, her face beaming as she addressed him as Master. However, his hand quickly covered her face, a blush spreading across her cheeks as the name Lottie echoed between them. Later, Elena had fully resumed her duties, serving Rand and the lady educator at the dining table. The lady educator observed the scene with a stern gaze, while Rand ate, seemingly oblivious to the unspoken questions that hung in the air. Had spring already arrived, or was it already over? Had their relationship truly advanced, even just a little? 3 small, bearded figures, resembling gnomes, diligently swept the grand hall. One of them paused, looking up with a curious expression, wondering what was happening. Meanwhile, outside the opulent mansion, Princess Rosaline walked through the lush gardens, her gaze distant. Later, inside the mansion, she conversed with the gnomes, asking what they had done in the garden that day. They informed her that they had greeted the black demon dog. She chuckled softly, amused by their report. The gnomes explained that the black demon dog, which they called Blackie, was said to bring death to those who saw it, but they had sung to it the other day and now saw it every day. She then explained the mansion's historical significance, noting its many valuable collections and its importance as a place where demon spirits could occasionally be seen. She added that the gnomes were diligent in their morning cleaning, and that it was wonderful that they brought happiness to the spirits who visited. The gnomes, touched by her words, praised her, calling her a truly good child. They noted that only the wealthy, like her, showed them respect, unlike the Oriole family. Her expression suddenly shifted, her eyes widening slightly with concern as she heard the mention of the Oriole family. The gnomes, noticing her change in demeanor, looked at each other with puzzled expressions. She leaned closer, her voice laced with worry, asking them what was wrong and what the object they were referring to was. One of the gnomes explained that they had never seen such an object before, and it hadn't been there when they opened the curtains that morning. Rosaline, looking at the object, realized it was a misunderstanding concerning Prince Edward. She knelt on the grand staircase, her expression troubled, as the house spirits gathered around her, their small forms a silent testament to the mansion's ancient secrets. Her distress was quickly overshadowed by a confrontation as a group of students, led by Rand, accused her and Elena of pushing someone. Elena vehemently denied the accusation, insisting it was a misunderstanding. Rand, however, dismissed their pleas, declaring their actions disgraceful. Prince Dominic then stepped forward, asserting that multiple witnesses had seen them at the scene of the incident yesterday. He urged them to confess their guilt, warning that he would not tolerate further excuses in front of His Highness. Rosaline, desperate, tried to explain that a black shadow had suddenly appeared, but Dominic cut her off, refusing to listen. She called out to Prince Dominic, asking what he intended to do with them, her voice filled with apprehension. Prince Dominic turned his back and walked away, leaving Rosaline to lament his harshness and the fact that he had ignored her, his own fiancée. The house spirits watched silently from the stairs. She pondered his disregard, realizing that if he could ignore his own fiancée, perhaps she should reconsider her choice of marriage partner. The gnomes seemed to agree, their expressions mirroring her concern. Meanwhile, outside the building, Rand observed the commotion, noting that the school seemed unusually agitated. He wondered what had happened, while Elena and Prince Edward stood nearby. Rosaline, still troubled, remained a short distance away. Elena approached Rand, greeting him as Edit-sama and Rune-sama, and wished him good morning. Rosaline, overhearing the exchange, realized that Edit was the young lady from the Lost Bell department store and possibly Dominic's fiancée. She looked at Rand with a knowing smile. Rand, however, corrected her, introducing himself as Roland Valerie and stating that he was always indebted to Rune-sama. Rosaline, flustered by the misunderstanding, covered her mouth in surprise. Still flustered by her previous mistake, she tried to ask Rand about Rune, but he seemed surprised by the question. Elena, standing nearby, recalled the lady educator's previous assessment of Rand, noting that he was quite knowledgeable about monsters and mythical beasts, especially dragons and demon lords, which could significantly change one's impression of him. Meanwhile, another princess, Princess Edit, expressed her excitement, revealing that she had always wanted to meet the hero of the divine sword, Rand, in person. Rand, engaging with Princess Edit, inquired if she truly enjoyed monsters and mythical beasts. She responded with an enthusiastic affirmation. As the conversation continued, Princess Edit mused internally about Rand, finding him truly wonderful and intelligent, a stark contrast to her initial impression of him being merely handsome. Rosaline, however, was still preoccupied with Prince Dominic, wondering how such a good person could be involved in the previous accusations. Suddenly, Rosaline's eyes widened as a thought struck her. She turned to Ran and Elena, urgently asking if they were aware of an incident that had occurred yesterday. Ran and Elena looked at her, surprised by her sudden question. Rosaline then explained that yesterday afternoon, Princess Crystal had fallen down the stairs. She admitted she didn't know the full details, but confirmed the fall. Unaware of the unfolding revelation, Princess Edith continued her internal monologue, expressing her strong desire to speak with Ran, the hero of the divine sword, about monsters and mythical creatures. Rosaline continued her account, revealing that a friend of Adlian's, who was present at the scene of Princess Crystal's fall, had been taken away by Prince Edward, accused of being the culprit. The shocking news left Ran, Elena, and Rosaline wide-eyed and utterly stunned, their faces contorted in disbelief. A group of students, including Ran, Elena, and Rosaline, stood outside a grand building. Rosaline, with her back to the others, seemed to be observing something intently. As they gathered, Rosaline remarked that they were completely late. Ran listened, his expression etched with concern. Rosaline then recalled a crucial detail, stating that Elena had conveyed Princess Constance's explicit instruction, from now on, do not directly harm Crystal. The memory of Crystal falling down a flight of stairs flashed through Ran's mind, and he internally questioned the audacity of someone acting so swiftly and crudely to push her. Meanwhile, Elena turned to Rosaline, posing a critical question. However, why didn't Prince Edward contact you, young master? Who is his right-hand man? Elsewhere, Prince Edward, with a wide, almost manic grin, held up a document for Ran to see. He declared it was the evidence he was reporting to Adrian's, who was currently searching for Crystal's whereabouts, but his tone suggested a deeper, more complex agenda. Back with the group, Rosaline explained that Prince Dominic had also left without a word, and she had been searching for him. A message had been hastily sent to Lord Adrian's, but Dominic himself interjected from the background, stating he had already forgotten the instructions. Rand's eyes widened in surprise at this revelation. Rand's concern deepened as he realized the implication. Adrian's already knew about the incident. He knew they needed to meet up quickly. High above, Prince Edward observed the unfolding events from a window, a calculating look in his eyes. He mused that if things continued this way, the individual in question would wait the full half-year and make a decision in the worst possible manner, precisely as Prince Jeremy, the second prince, intended. Below, Ran and Elena stood back to back, seemingly unaware of the true extent of the machinations against them. He stood at the foot of the grand staircase, his voice echoing through the hall as he commanded his attendant, Adrian, to apprehend the women and bring them forward. Prince Edward's face was contorted in a furious expression, his eyes fixed on Princess Rosaline, Ran, and Elena, who stood on the stairs above. However, she met his gaze with unwavering resolve, questioning what crime her friends had committed to warrant such an order. Edward, undeterred, accused them of being involved in the numerous suspicions surrounding Princess Crystal, including the incident where she was pushed from the balcony. He warned them that if they did not confess, they would face dire consequences. She pressed him further, asking about his relationship with Princess Crystal and why they, who knew nothing, were being implicated. Rosaline then directly challenged him, asking if he had any idea what was truly happening. As the tension mounted, Ran, Rosaline, and Elena exchanged worried glances, realizing the situation was already at a critical point. Edward's anger flared, his expression growing even more menacing. Despite the confrontation, Rosaline considered the possibility that Prince Dominic might not have been interested in the kind of things Edward was discussing, suggesting he might have forgotten the instructions given to him that morning. Meanwhile, Ran observed Edward, realizing that he seemed to believe Princess Crystal's engagement was a trivial matter. He also recalled that Edward had previously referred to Crystal as a wicked woman. Rosaline then outlined her strategy, explaining that if they were to prove Adrian's innocence, they would need to find the true reason behind Crystal's fall, a reason unrelated to Adrian. She believed that Constance had been spreading false rumors about Adrian to Crystal, and that Constance was likely behind the entire scheme. Just as she finished, Edward produced a small, corked bottle, holding it up as he asked if she believed it had some connection to the events. Princess Rosaline and another princess discussed a peculiar discovery. Rosaline explained that while animal hair occasionally appeared in the academy, this particular specimen was unlike anything she had seen before. She wondered if it could be from some kind of monster. Meanwhile, Elena the maid conversed with the house spirits, who confirmed they had not encountered anything similar when she collected the sample. Elena then realized the hair, despite its size difference, bore a striking resemblance to the fur and scales of Cerberus, a creature they had recently battled. Her words impressed Princess Rosaline, who acknowledged Elena's direct combat experience with a monster, recognizing her as a maid of the esteemed Oriole family. Rosaline then apologized for getting sidetracked, explaining her belief that the hair originated from a demon, as such creatures sometimes manifested within the academy without leaving a trace. She then asked Elena if she would be willing to discuss the matter further at a later time, to which Elena eagerly agreed. Elsewhere, Prince Edward was deep in thought, contemplating the implications of a reported transfer accident and the newly discovered traces of a demon. He then turned to Rosaline, inquiring if she could clarify the true nature of the hair and scales. She confirmed that she could. She suggested they might find answers within the Academy's library. Edward, with a determined expression, urgently requested that she and Elena investigate immediately. Elena's expression grew serious as the other princess looked on. Edward then pondered his own role in the unfolding events. Prince Dominic, however, sharply interrupted, asserting that it was improper to question a princess without regard for location, implying such duties belonged to a knight. He then sternly commanded Edward to be silent, stating he had no interest in his opinions. Dominic then turned his gaze directly to Rosaline, calling out to Prince Edward with a serious and challenging tone. As the tension lingered, Edward stood at the foot of a grand staircase, his back to the viewer, while a group of onlookers, including Dominic, Rosaline, Elena, Blanche, Ran, Onyankopon, Francis, the lady educator, and another noblewoman, observed him from the balcony above. He greeted Ran with a wide smile, noting his tardiness and asking if he had not received word from Dominic. Ran, caught off guard, could only utter a surprised sound. Ran's gaze shifted to Dominic, who stood nearby with a stern expression that quickly soured into an annoyed tisich as he observed the exchange. A realization dawned on Ran. Dominic had deliberately withheld information from him. Edward, still smiling, acknowledged Rand's apology for the communication error and his tardiness. He then declared his intention to expose the truth about those girls, implying Rand's presence was a strategic advantage. Nearby, Princess Rosaline listened with a serious expression, while Elena stood beside her, visibly concerned by Edward's pronouncement. Rosaline's composure shattered, her mind racing with the thought that Edward had intentionally arrived late to create a spectacle, a move she perceived as truly cursed. Beside her, Rand gasped in shock, realizing the implications for Edward's attendance. Despite Rosaline's furious internal vow to prevent any harm, Rand offered a confident smile, assuring her that he was her ally. Two young men, Roland and Jeremy, stand poised, ready to embark on a new chapter of their story, titled, "The Prince's Retainer is the Villainess's Ally." Jeremy, with a look of surprise, inquired if the rumors were true. Had Princess Crystal truly fallen down the stairs? Roland, with a wide, almost mischievous grin, confirmed the incident, then quickly dismissed Jeremy's concern with a sharp retort. He recounted the event, explaining that Crystal had missed a step and tumbled down 3 flights, twisting her wrist in the process. Standing beside him, Crystal herself confirmed his account, adding that the fall had indeed been quite painful. Jeremy, still concerned, pressed for more details, asking if that was the full extent of the incident. Roland, looking away, reassured him that Crystal was fine and merely resting for the day, which brought a measure of relief to Jeremy. Roland then offered an apology to Jeremy for not having informed him about Crystal's accident the previous day. Jeremy acknowledged his understanding of the situation. Jeremy explained that he had been away from home that afternoon, hence his ignorance of the events. He then revealed his intention to have called Roland out for a discussion. Unbeknownst to Jeremy, Roland had been conducting a discreet investigation into his background. Roland elaborated, stating that he and his associates had been operating under the belief that it was crucial not to rush in identifying the culprit. Jeremy listened intently, then sought clarification on this particular opinion. He furrowed his brow, a clear sign of frustration as he processed Roland's carefully chosen words. A realization dawned on Jeremy. This cautious approach must be another one of Dominic's prophecies. With newfound determination, he resolved to take action. Roland, looking somewhat pained, offered another apology to Jeremy, acknowledging the rarity of him apologizing to anyone, especially a subordinate. He admitted to having witnessed something truly extraordinary. He declared that they had found the culprit who had pushed Crystal. He pointed directly at 2 female students, accusing them of being the villains. The 2 students recoiled in shock and fear. One of the accused, a student with a flower clip in her hair, vehemently denied the accusation, insisting they were victims and not villains, and that they would not allow themselves to be falsely implicated before His Highness. Jeremy listened intently as Roland continued, asserting that they had obtained testimony directly from Princess Crystal herself, who claimed she was pushed. Jeremy pondered the possibility, wondering if Crystal truly provided such a statement. The student with the flower clip countered, explaining that the information being spread about Princess Constance's accident was false. She clarified that Princess Crystal had been receiving daily care from Adrian, implying a different reality than what Roland suggested. Roland dismissed her claims, stating that if Crystal didn't trip, then a culprit must exist. He then described the moment of the incident, recalling how the 2 students were walking behind Crystal when she fell, and instead of helping, they fled. The student, visibly distressed, questioned how they could have helped when they were also surprised by the sudden fall. She insisted that if another culprit existed, the suspicion on them would never clear. She further explained that while they were indeed surprised by the sudden accident, there were many witnesses, yet no one saw the moment Crystal was supposedly pushed. She then bowed deeply, apologizing for their actions. Roland, however, remained unconvinced, pointing out that the 2 students were 3 steps away from Crystal when she fell. He questioned if it was truly fair to immediately label them as criminals given the distance. Jeremy observed Roland's stern expression. Roland aggressively declared that if she claimed innocence, she must present evidence. Otherwise, he would consider them criminals. He asserted that there was a suspicious fact behind her, more than just a simple fall. The female student looked on, stunned. Jeremy interjected, confirming Roland's statement about the lack of proof. He then challenged Roland, asking how one could possibly prove something that did not exist, implying the accusation was baseless. Roland, with a determined expression, insisted that the student council was using its overwhelming authority to push its agenda, believing that Princess Crystal's fall was evil. He claimed that since Princess Crystal had been pushed, their argument that she was the culprit was unshakable. However, the female student countered, asserting that as the fair and just student council president, He had no right to accuse her friends. Roland's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening as he questioned if she still intended to defy him. Jeremy clapped his hands loudly, drawing attention, then called out to Roland, asking what he was doing. He then raised his hand, signaling for silence. He then explained to Roland that the student council president was being treated as a hero by the teachers. He questioned if it wasn't the student council president's natural duty to investigate the cause of the fall accident and work to prevent its recurrence. Roland, surprised by Jeremy's words, exclaimed that he had indeed been thinking the same thing. He then pointed a finger, declaring that he would make the student council president clearly take responsibility for the cause of the incident. The female student, listening intently, acknowledged Jeremy's point, realizing that understanding the cause of the accident was crucial for preventing its recurrence. Jeremy then clarified his own role, stating it was to buy time until they could gather evidence to clearly identify the true culprit. Jeremy turned to Roland, asking for his thoughts on the matter, especially since Princess Crystal had suddenly appeared. Roland, deep in thought, then had a sudden realization, exclaiming that it was true. Someone had indeed pushed her. Jeremy confirmed Roland's thought, acknowledging that there was indeed an impact from behind, and he wished he could take her place. He then added that it was fine, as their objective was to find the true culprit. He then looked at the female student, continuing his thought, suggesting that perhaps someone had pushed her. He questioned if something had perhaps struck Princess Crystal, rather than her simply falling. Indeed, she confirmed, explaining that a black, fuzzy mass had fallen from the ceiling at that very moment. She wondered aloud if it had been a monster. Roland immediately dismissed the notion, scoffing at the idea of a monster and questioning who would believe such a ridiculous claim. He accused them of making excuses, asserting that lying was unacceptable and that they should have helped Princess Crystal. However, the female students insisted it was true, describing how the black mass had yellow eyes and had laughed at them, terrifying them. Overwhelmed by fear, they admitted they had fled in an instant. They expressed regret for their cowardly actions, acknowledging they should have spoken up sooner. Roland, still skeptical, questioned if there was any evidence of a monster, or if the entire incident was merely a foolish prank. He demanded to know if there was any proof of a creature. Jeremy interjected, urging Roland to wait. He explained that if they were to accuse someone of a crime, they needed to proceed carefully and not waste any more time. He suggested that if a monster truly existed, they should investigate it properly. Edith, a student with long, wavy dark hair, expressed her gratitude for the swift delivery of information, noting how quickly the aliens had entered the stomach. Roland, observing the exchange, pondered if Lord Rast had known about this rapid infiltration. Meanwhile, Jeremy and two subordinates confronted another student, Dominic, demanding to know why he, as an engaged party, had failed to follow a single instruction. They declared his actions a complete failure. Back with Edith, she addressed Edward, stating she had been awaiting his arrival. Roland then inquired if she possessed the thing that Lord Rast had mentioned. She confirmed, producing a small, corked bottle. As she held it up, Roland and the other students stared intently at the mysterious object. He questioned what it was, wondering aloud if it was merely refuse. Jeremy and Crystal exchanged worried glances, their expressions reflecting the gravity of the situation. Roland, turning to Crystal, pressed her for an explanation of the item's true nature. Crystal, holding the bottle, explained that she had investigated the gremlin and the body of Amelin. She revealed that the item was related to her findings. Jeremy, intrigued, asked for clarification on what a gremlin was. Roland considered the implications, pondering the possibility that the second prince might be involved. Crystal then elaborated, stating that gremlins were peculiar creatures known to bring happiness to people and induce changes within them. He reacted with surprise, having never heard of such beings. She continued, describing gremlins as medium-sized creatures, primarily inhabiting the northern regions, characterized by their large, yellow eyes. Roland and Jeremy listened intently, seemingly grasping the concept. Crystal then turned to Jeremy, remarking that he was far too excellent a helper for Lord Rast, implying a deeper, perhaps manipulative, dynamic. She still held the small bottle, its contents a silent testament to her investigation. Roland, however, remained unconvinced, questioning why a gremlin would be present in the academy and demanding to see the evidence. He pressed her on when such proof would be revealed, leaving Crystal with a look of mild astonishment at his skepticism. He watched as Edith, her back to him, addressed the assembled students, asking what had happened to everyone. He had specifically requested her to bring a witness. She then explained, with a bright smile, that she had just met the family fairies and was accompanying them to the classroom. Behind her, three small, gnome-like figures stood, looking on. He greeted them, addressing Edith and the family fairies, even calling one of the older fairies Oriel's boy. Internally, he mused about the idiot princes gathering like fools. He then turned his attention to the family fairies, politely asking if they had a moment to spare. The fairies, in turn, thanked him for his trouble. Holding up the small bottle containing the black fuzz, he inquired if they knew anything about the black hair and fuzz that had reportedly been collected from the east staircase this morning. The family fairies confirmed they had indeed found it that morning, precisely when they were performing their daily cleaning duties. He then pressed further, asking if they had ever seen such hair or fuzz before during their regular cleaning of the school grounds. They emphatically stated they had never seen anything like it, not even during the cleaning the previous morning. He deduced that the material must have appeared sometime between yesterday morning and today. Just then, Jeremy interjected, calling out to Roland. Roland, ignoring Jeremy's call, turned sharply to Edith, his voice laced with suspicion. He accused her and the family fairies of being in collusion. questioning if they were merely coordinating their stories to deceive them. He pressed his point further, asserting that the credibility of a witness was inherently compromised if they were also involved in the cleaning process. He dismissed the evidence as unreliable, claiming it could easily be fabricated. Jeremy and Crystal exchanged worried glances, while the family fairies, deeply offended by the implication that their daily duties were a lie, erupted in furious protest. With a final, dismissive gesture, Roland declared that the family fairies should disappear from his mansion forever. The fairies, their faces contorted with rage, retorted that they had never liked his attitude anyway and would gladly leave if he truly wished it, but warned him not to underestimate the pride of their clan. He stood resolute, his gaze firm amidst the growing concern of his peers. Jeremy, subordinate A, and others watched with wide eyes, their expressions a mixture of shock and apprehension as the implications of the fairies' departure settled upon them. A group of students, including Roland and Jeremy, discussed the dire situation. One student, with glasses, expressed concern, asking what they should do if the family fairies were truly gone. Roland, looking worried, agreed that it was a serious problem. Below them, the small, elderly gnomes of the family fairy group appeared distressed. A new student, Arthur, listened intently, while another, Dominic, looked shocked. The family fairies were revered as beings of good fortune, and their presence brought prosperity. Upper-class families, including those at the academy, were said to be wealthy enough to attract them. Conversely, families abandoned by the fairies were rumored to face ruin. The discussion continued, with Roland observing that everyone was panicking because of the situation. Arthur then turned to Dominic, asserting that the Oriole family was undoubtedly one of them, and therefore, they were their comrades. He declared that Dominic was trying to trick them into believing otherwise. Meanwhile, the gnomes of the family fairy group conversed amongst themselves, noting that Dominic always forgot his manners and spoke rudely. They added that the Oriole family's fairies were also quite talkative. Arthur continued, telling Dominic that he was different from the others, that he was special. Dominic, taken aback, questioned if he was truly special, or if he was just being treated specially. Dominic's expression hardened as he thought about Arthur, realizing that he couldn't stop thinking about him. He muttered that Arthur was truly. He reflected that Dominic had always desired to be special, but that being special wasn't necessarily a good thing. Elsewhere, a young woman with horns, Lilith, spoke of power, stating that those who possessed it were born to be violent and destructive, and that they were trying to erase a past that should not have happened. She added that the words spoken to a child could become a curse. Roland, listening intently, then remarked that Dominic only saw things from one perspective, believing that power was something to be seized. Arthur, looking surprised, seemed to question this perspective. Roland then burst into laughter, dismissing the gnomes as outdated family fairies who were a nuisance. He declared that they should just get rid of them, as they were no longer needed. In agreement, the other students, including Arthur and Dominic, echoed Roland's sentiments, praising his stance and declaring that they had no need for the power of family fairies. The family fairies, observing the students' dismissive attitudes, lamented their own foolishness. They had not realized the extent of the students' ignorance regarding the true importance of family fairies, and now, they wondered what would become of them. Meanwhile, Roland, ever confident, addressed the assembled students. He declared that the royal family and nobles abandoning their family fairies was a public disgrace, causing widespread anxiety among the populace. He vowed to ensure they would all bow their heads in acknowledgement later. He then shifted his focus, acknowledging that their conversation had strayed. He proposed to summarize the situation. An unprecedented incident had occurred where a black, yellow-eyed creature, identified as a demon's trace, was discovered and captured at the Rasberg ruins. This creature, a gremlin of joy known for making people stumble, was now in their possession. Edith interjected, agreeing with Roland's assessment. She confirmed that, based on the excellent right-hand man's account, she also believed the gremlin was indeed the cause of the recent events. He, however, was interrupted by Arthur, who questioned the immediate assumption that the creature was a demon. Arthur suggested it could merely be animal fur, or perhaps the gremlin was the true culprit, which would cast suspicion upon the girls. Roland, growing frustrated, demanded to know if such a monster truly existed, and if so, insisted it be brought forth. Just as he demanded proof, Lilith appeared at the top of a grand staircase, holding the very creature in question. She announced her arrival, presenting the gremlin for all to see. The prince's manager is a villainous ally. Chapter 13, Manager, Power Release. A commoner, enraged, cursed the situation, declaring that he would never forgive the divine child and would repay the debt from the department store. Meanwhile, a group of demons discussed their strategy. One remarked that they had expected an easy job, merely needing to turn over a princess, but this brat was more than they anticipated. Another demon saw this as an opportune moment, suggesting they could defeat the hero and become heroes of the demon race themselves. The armored warlord listened intently, his expression grim. The shadowy maw of a monstrous entity loomed, but the young man, his gaze sharp, dismissed the idea of easily defeating a hero as foolish. He recalled the incident at the department store, where a single individual had defeated a monster like a D rank, occupying the entire building. The commoner, witnessing the chaos, expressed his shock at the brat who had flown in. The man in the top hat, equally stunned, questioned how a mere collection of countries could possibly defeat such a formidable opponent. The young man then remembered a time when everyone had been captured without even being touched. He hadn't understood it then, but now he realized that the man who had appeared later was the true culprit. The demon race's summons had brought a storm, and the young man, facing a colossal shadowy creature, believed that only the Demon King could truly stand against it. He scoffed at the notion of being naive enough to stop him. Meanwhile, the armored warlord and the horned demon discussed their captive, a commoner, wondering how he had survived and how they would proceed now that they had been given a sudden opportunity to capture him. The warlord, observing the situation, deduced that the mission was likely the same as before, to target the silver-haired girl and the red-haired girl. The horned demon, frustrated, exclaimed that his demon's servant had been captured and that the red-haired girl had not yet been dealt with. He urged his subordinate to quickly retrieve her before their plan fell apart. The warlord's gaze hardened as he considered the prince's significant grudge against the red-haired girl, though he mused that her personal vendetta was of little consequence to him. He reflected on their failure at the department store, where they had aimed for the girl but missed. He then considered that if they could somehow fulfill the request this time, the prince might directly intervene. A maid with long, dark hair presented a small, dark creature with large ears and glowing eyes, announcing its capture. The students reacted with surprise, one exclaiming about the creature being a gremlin. The maid, Elena, confirmed it was indeed a gremlin, explaining that she had captured the monster that had been lurking within the academy. Another student wondered if it was truly a demon. She then questioned if, given the creature's existence, they would acknowledge the causal relationship between the accident and the monster. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Jeremy observed the scene, while Roland, addressed as Edward Dono, stood nearby with a serious expression. Jeremy, still processing the creature, wondered aloud if it was truly a gremlin or something more akin to a demon from the southern lands. Roland suggested it was merely a pet that had escaped, implying no malicious intent. The protagonist, however, questioned if it was all a setup, wondering if the Adlians were behind it, and if such a malevolent creature could even enter the academy. Student A interjected, stating that if it were truly a demon, the elder brother would know immediately. Roland's eyes widened slightly in surprise at the mention of the elder brother, while the protagonist listened intently. She continued, explaining that the elder brother was a user of divine weapons, which drew their power from demons. As she spoke, a large, ornate, and menacing divine weapon materialized, its dark energy swirling around it. With the weapon now present, the protagonist was directly instructed to summon a divine weapon. Roland looked on, visibly shocked by the command. Roland, still reeling, questioned if this was truly acceptable, asking if they intended to confirm whether the protagonist was lying. The protagonist, however, met the challenge with a determined gaze. Student A clarified that while the divine weapon was indeed enshrined in a great shrine, the elder brother could summon it instantly from anywhere in the world. The materialized weapon now stood prominently on display, a testament to the power being discussed. A wave of astonishment washed over the students as the instruction to summon a divine weapon was given. Her eyes widened, reflecting the sheer disbelief and wonder at the task at hand, exclaiming her amazement. She continued, expressing her intense desire to dissect and study the divine weapon, eager to understand its mechanisms. He, however, appeared more cautious, reminding her that the creature was a demon, and its power should not be underestimated. He suggested that the gremlin, being evidence, should be kept away from the school building. Moments later, the maid Elena descended the grand staircase, having been given a specific request. She acknowledged the instruction with a polite affirmation, ready to carry out her duties. She carefully held a freshly purchased handkerchief, its delicate lace trim visible. Then, with the gremlin secured, she began to move, carrying the small, dark creature with her. Approaching the group of students, she politely inquired if anyone could lend her a handkerchief, explaining her need. The students watched her with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He readily offered his own handkerchief, asking if it would suffice. She accepted it with gratitude, but as she held the gremlin, the creature began to thrash violently, its small body struggling against her grasp, startling the surrounding students. The sudden outburst left him and the female student wide-eyed with concern as the gremlin continued its agitated movements, its glowing eyes fixed on something unseen. A hand reached out, gently touching the coarse fur that had been shed by the struggling gremlin. He held the handkerchief, now containing the gremlin's shed fur, as Elena confirmed that the evidence had been collected and advised against further interaction with it. The other students looked on, still visibly shaken by the creature's earlier outburst. The female student then turned to Roland, asking if the divine weapon's power would affect the black demon in the hallway, expressing concern for its safety. Roland calmly reassured her, explaining that the power could be contained within the building and that as long as they didn't add more power, it would be fine. Meanwhile, the protagonist looked down at the gremlin, which suddenly began to transform, growing larger and more menacing, its eyes glowing fiercely as he addressed it by a new name, Kuro-chan. He listened as Roland, with a confident smile, urged him to fully display the power of the divine sword hero. The protagonist, meeting his gaze with a determined expression, affirmed that he would indeed proceed with the summoning. As he walked away, his steps echoing softly, the protagonist was observed by female student A, who watched him with a serious gaze, and female student C, who stood nearby. A small family fairy also looked up at him, as the story of Growl continued. Roland, with focused intensity, began a solemn invocation, calling upon a divine weapon in the name of Roland Valerie Oriole. The protagonist watched, his hands clasped in anticipation. His eyes widened with resolve as he commanded the weapon to come forth. Moments later, a colossal divine weapon, Belle Grande, materialized above him in a brilliant surge of energy, its form majestic and powerful. The sheer power of the summoned weapon left the onlookers stunned, with female student A and B gasping in disbelief at what they perceived as the hero's true strength. Meanwhile, the family fairies, descending the grand staircase, paused, one of them questioning the strange noise emanating from the storage area below. Roland, still looking up, seemed to acknowledge their presence with a surprised exclamation. His attention, along with that of Jeremy and other students, then shifted to the ground where the remnants of the shadowy creature were rapidly fading away, leaving behind only a faint shimmer. They expressed their astonishment at its complete disappearance. Elsewhere, Edith held a bottle, realizing with a gasp that the contents she had collected were also vanishing, mirroring the creature's dissipation. She then reported her findings to Roland and the others, confirming that the evidence collected from the creature had vanished, just as the creature itself had. Jeremy and Arthur acknowledged her report, confirming they had also witnessed the disappearance. Roland, taking charge, declared that the student council would immediately investigate the appearance of the monster within the school grounds, as such an incident could not be ignored. He also linked this investigation to the female student's fall, suggesting that the previous suspicions against them were now cleared. He then added a crucial condition to his statement, causing female student A and B to react with a mix of surprise and apprehension. He listened intently as the protagonist, with a serious expression, explained that while he understood the need to quickly resolve the situation, if His Highness were to investigate the gremlin's appearance, it would inevitably lead to a second or third incident. He then declared that the swift resolution and power displayed by His Highness were truly commendable, something everyone should be grateful for. As the protagonist finished speaking, the surrounding students erupted in cheers, praising Edward Dono's brilliance and wonderful performance. Roland, observing the enthusiastic crowd, simply smiled, acknowledging their gratitude. Despite the adulation, the protagonist seemed less than thrilled by the public adoration, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. He then let out a small, almost imperceptible sneeze, his eyes closed in mild discomfort. Meanwhile, Edith observed the scene with a stern, almost disapproving gaze. The small, surprised protagonist noticed her expression, realizing she was once again wearing that face. He then turned to Roland, explaining that while it was unavoidable to make the first prince look good, he was tired of the troublesome things that kept appearing. He asked if Roland would compromise this time. Roland, with a knowing smile, replied that he was a generous man, and if the protagonist reflected on his own actions, he would understand. Edith, having listened to their exchange, acknowledged Roland's words. She then explained that she was the daughter of the Duke of Geraldite and represented the Royal Academy, implying a certain responsibility. Roland, in turn, stated that the protagonist was truly a good friend, always thinking of others, and that he needed to make her open her eyes soon. Roland then declared that they would head to the salon, asking if the protagonist would join them. The protagonist replied that he still had things to do and would show his face later. Roland accepted this, telling him he would wait. As Roland departed, the protagonist remained, looking towards Edith, who stood silently on the stairs, her arms crossed. Edith, still with a serious expression, met his gaze. She, with her cheeks faintly flushed, looked at the protagonist with wide, slightly surprised eyes. He held the massive divine sword, its intricate design gleaming, as he explained to Roland and Edith that while he could summon the sacred blade, he inexplicably could not make it return to its original place. Her expression shifted to one of mild disappointment as she processed his words. She had felt a surge of excitement when it was first summoned, but now, knowing it couldn't be unsummoned, it suddenly seemed rather plain. Meanwhile, Roland, seemingly unfazed by the sword's predicament, instructed Elena to arrange a carriage to transport the divine sword to Belgrande. Elena promptly acknowledged the order. Edith, overhearing, internally mused about the divine sword and the hero's movements. Elena then turned to Edith, confirming the arrangements and offering to escort her and the other ladies. Edith, with a bright smile, thanked Roland for the magnificent display of the divine sword summoning. The protagonist stood nearby, observing the exchange. She brushed off Roland's gratitude, stating that it was nothing, and announced her intention to go check on Kuro-chan. Roland, with a cheerful wave, bid farewell to the protagonist, who watched him depart with a slight bead of sweat on his brow. Edith then approached the protagonist, expressing her sincere gratitude for his help in clearing her friend's suspicions. He, however, humbly insisted that he had done nothing of consequence. She smiled warmly, explaining that she wanted to properly thank him and asked if he would mind waiting a little longer until her ride arrived. He gazed upon the imposing structure, a stark contrast to the department store he had recently visited. A premonition of something unpleasant, something incomparable, settled over him. Meanwhile, the family fairies, having arrived at a new location, were startled. One of them exclaimed, wondering what this place was, while another grunted with effort, as if moving something heavy. The gnomes had entered a desolate, crumbling chamber, its walls scarred and floor littered with debris. One of them voiced their confusion, questioning the nature of this forgotten space. Among the debris lay antiquated armor and rusted blades, remnants of a bygone era. One of the gnomes pondered their purpose, wondering what these strange relics could be. One of the gnomes held up a heavy, ornate collar, its design unsettling. Another gnome gasped in recognition, declaring it to be a slave collar, an item outlawed half a century prior. A third gnome added that there were 10 such collars in total. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Edith stood with one of the family fairies, discussing the unsettling discovery. Edith, visibly distressed, questioned if this was the work of a gremlin, noting that such items had not been present until yesterday. The gnome, however, simply remarked that strange things often occur. Lilith, with a dramatic flourish, declared the young man before her a hero of the divine mark, who had once again saved the world. He, however, humbly dismissed her praise, stating it was not such a grand feat. She then questioned his modesty, reminding him that he had only summoned Behemoth. He, in turn, urged her not to be so humble. Lilith then inquired about the timing of his divine mark summoning. He clarified that it had been activated a year prior, during the Behemoth incident. Her demeanor shifted abruptly. First, she adopted a sweet, almost innocent expression, noting that the third princess had begun to involve herself. But then, her face contorted into a furious snarl as she declared that if the third princess dared to lay a hand on the hero, she would not remain silent. He, startled by her intensity, urged her not to utter such provocative words. Still agitated, she held an abacus, questioning if resorting to force was not an outdated and undesirable approach. She then quickly added that the color change was an entirely separate matter. With a mischievous smile, she leaned in, suggesting that since he was still single, this might be an opportune moment to consider his future alongside his sister. He quickly denied her implication, appearing flustered, and told her not to be shy. She pressed closer, her smile widening as she declared her perpetual welcome and her desire to work together for world peace. He, however, recoiled slightly, politely declining her offer. He then fell into thought, acknowledging that his parents had indeed arranged an engagement for him, though he had no personal connection to the story. He mused that, thanks to this, the young lady involved had not been caught up in the commotion surrounding the annulment of the engagement, but his thoughts trailed off. As Lilith descended a grand staircase, he recalled causing trouble for the demon race recently. She, seemingly reading his thoughts, mentally confirmed if he was referring to the Russell department store incident. She then voiced her opinion that it was not merely a simple cell that resorted to force, and furthermore, it was ignorant for the hero of the divine mark to pick a fight. He stood with a serious expression, his gaze fixed forward, as a hand reached out towards him, its owner remarking that it was a miracle he was still alive. He sat in the opulent salon, a document in hand, as Gino, the elderly gentleman, stood before him. Maid Elena was also present, observing the exchange. He learned that the documents for the demon race's release were deemed insufficient, and that external pressure had been applied, preventing their proper discharge. He questioned what this meant. Lilith then revealed that the current Minister of Foreign Affairs, Count Dominic Amarshi, was a member of her own family, implying a connection to the recent events. Considering her words, the protagonist realized his earlier prediction about Dominic's involvement might have been accurate. He then pressed Gino for information, asking about the whereabouts of the demon race. Gino explained that the demon race, having been released the previous day, had vanished without a trace, disappearing like smoke. The protagonist, troubled by this news, expressed concern that the demons might seek revenge on him and Princess Adriance. He suggested arranging protection beforehand, and then asked Gino if he could handle such a task. Gino, however, dismissed his worries, stating he didn't believe such precautions were necessary, but agreed to investigate their movements nonetheless. The protagonist acknowledged his response. Suddenly, Elena chimed in, reporting that the family fairies, including Edward, had all left the salon. A sudden realization dawned on him, as he let out a surprised sound, connecting Elena's report to the earlier discussion. Just as he processed this thought, the family fairies appeared, confronting him directly. They demanded an apology for his rude behavior and insisted he accompany them, declaring emphatically that the family fairies would never disappear. He sat on the couch, observing the elegant room. Maid Elena, standing nearby, offered to prepare sweets and join them, to which he expressed his gratitude. Princess Crystal sat quietly on the opposite couch. Elsewhere, the first Prince Roland boasted loudly, claiming he had stopped the cause of an incident within the school grounds. He declared that the reason for the accident was due to the family fairies, and that he had been making a triumphant announcement. Behind him, a small, shadowy creature remained confined within a cage, its glowing eyes visible. Back in the refined parlor, Maid Elena inquired about Edward Dono's condition after the previous events. He responded with a simple, somewhat noncommittal sound. He let out a deep sigh, his eyes closed in weariness, acknowledging that things were indeed as they seemed. Meanwhile, Roland continued his self-aggrandizing, recounting how he had presented Princess Crystal with an extraordinary bouquet of flowers the previous day, claiming it was for her. Lilith, however, mused darkly that perhaps it would be better to simply make things disappear for the sake of the country, finding the situation troublesome. The protagonist, in his thoughts, appeared exasperated. Crystal then turned to him, asking about Adliant Sama. He looked surprised by the question. Crystal's ideal vision of the situation was one where the hero of the divine mark, her brother, had apologized and their relationship had grown closer. The reality, however, was far different. The protagonist, clutching his head in distress, recalled how the hero had been nothing but a nuisance, and how his brother's words had only caused more trouble. Roland and Lilith, in this harsh reality, appeared far less amiable. Gino, the butler, then formally announced that the first prince's innocence had been proven, and the worst of the incident had been avoided, concluding that for now, they would consider the matter resolved. The protagonist, Elena, and Crystal listened intently. Crystal, looking utterly surprised, expressed her disappointment, believing she had finally conveyed her brother's charm to Adliant Sama. She wondered if Rune had given up on her and her brother. Elena, in her own thoughts, considered that perhaps it was the best choice. The protagonist, still processing, appeared confused. Elena then stated firmly that as long as the first prince refused to correct his behavior, he would continue to cause trouble, and Adliant Sama would likely remain troubled. Crystal agreed with a nod. The protagonist, listening to their assessment, looked thoughtful, a sense of resignation settling upon him. He observed Princess Crystal from a distance, reflecting on the recent events. Saving her had only led to her being taken away again, and there was nothing particularly strange about her demeanor. He felt a headache forming, wondering how he could possibly divert everyone's attention from her. Later, as he sat with his head in his hands, Madalena approached, asking if he was feeling unwell. He mused internally that simply thinking about the foolish future only gave him more headaches, while Gino and Edith looked on. His discomfort persisted, and he wondered if it was merely his imagination. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the noise and friction from the gears within him had recently increased. It felt as though the gears were turning by force, no longer meshing smoothly as they usually did. In the quiet of the library, he sat at a desk, lost in thought, as Edith informed him of a significant development. A powerful noble family or lord had a family fairy that had suddenly disappeared. She confirmed that Eduardo was indeed involved in the disappearance of that family fairy. She continued, detailing that the family fairies of other houses connected to the incident had also vanished. Edith added that Eduardo's direct subordinate, Duke Oriol, vehemently denied any involvement. He listened, unimpressed, finding the situation less interesting than he had anticipated. Edith pressed on, emphasizing that despite any denials, the undeniable fact remained that Eduardo had caused anxiety among the populace. She asserted that his approval rating must have certainly plummeted. He remained silent for a moment, his hand resting on his chin, pondering if this outcome was not, in fact, the result of someone's deliberate actions. His thoughts coalesced into a stark declaration. Failure was simply failure. Edith, understanding his sentiment, concurred. She explained that if they had simply followed their initial objective, which was to make Eduardo and his retainers fail, and then discredit Adrian's, her frustration boiled over, and she exclaimed that the demon race was truly useless and foolish. In a past mission, they had been given another chance, only to mess up by sending in a gremlin. After that colossal failure, everyone involved was hidden away. Edith considered another approach, a method to disappoint those two, and ensure Jeremy ascended to the position of prince. Roland stood nearby, his expression unreadable. He looked out a window, a quiet hey, escaping his lips, as if lost in a distant memory. Still by the window, he heard a voice from outside ask why he wasn't playing with them. He turned, his eyes wide with surprise, to see a young boy looking up at him from the garden below. Roland explained that he had an illness and could not go outside. The boy, undeterred, offered to play together and revealed he possessed a blessing from a family fairy that he could share. He extended his hand, inviting Roland to take it. Roland reached out, his fingers meeting the boy's. The young boy smiled warmly, wishing a blessing upon him as well. Suddenly, Roland's eyes widened in alarm as a hand firmly gripped his arm, pulling him away from the window. A stern voice demanded to know what he was doing. The young boy was admonished not to associate with that kind of person and was ordered to come down. He looked crestfallen, murmuring that he had to leave. Later, Roland sat at a desk, his gaze fixed on his own hands, which seemed to faintly glow with a residual energy from the encounter. Meanwhile, Edith, having observed or considered the situation, simply stated, "Well, fine," before clenching her fist with quiet resolve. He declared that there was still a chance, and if it meant dragging them all to hell, he would reach out for it as many times as necessary. He then affirmed his resolve, stating that he would obtain what he sought. As he turned, a determined glint in his eyes, he contemplated that beautiful loyalty. A chilling question lingered. Was Roland the true target? The next chapter would reveal all, marking the final installment.